Many people wonder what is the most important thing that replenishes youth. Maybe it's sincere enthusiasm and desire for a bright future. For some, the most important aspect may be strong friendship for many years. Or, young hearts still require something more, for example, a relationship. But for the main character, all these things are illusory, and all this is not enough. There are many incomprehensible situations between people. In other words, it is very difficult to find a person who can understand you. But the young man thinks that if the desire to understand each other is ignored, then calling love that way loses its meaning. Busy with these thoughts, Chris Brown finds on his desk an invitation from one of his students to the tennis court. For him, it's a complete headache to receive confessions from his charges. To his surprise, when he arrived at the meeting place, he saw his familiar student named Melinda Spring. Chris decided to write off this meeting as some work moment, and immediately began talking about the report that she could submit to the student council. But the girl was not happy about this. She wants him to stop pretending to be stupid. Melinda will kill him if he does not listen to her. Chris decides to ignore everything and has already turned around to walk away. The heroine ran out of patience. She grabbed the young man by the collar and pulled him towards her. Finding himself in a difficult situation, Chris looks at Melinda, flushed with embarrassment. She, gathering her courage, confesses her love to him. The student wants to know whether he will accept her feelings and whether he will become her boyfriend. Chris feels trapped for the first time. This is a real recognition that he cannot avoid, but he does not want to fall in love yet, and it will be difficult to refuse. She is the champion of the archery club. Melinda continues to shake him by the shoulders and ask the fatal question. Chris just wants to fall into the ground and disappear. But he realizes that he is a strong man who has had to go through many battles. He is the best when it comes to escaping. Chris decides to play the role, and turns around and looks Melinda straight in the eyes, saying that, unfortunately, he already has a loved one, but to his surprise, he said this not alone. The guys notice a student standing in the distance, who apologizes and says that she is very sorry. It turns out that Melinda had appointed a rather popular meeting place, because a few meters away there was also an unsuccessful declaration of love. Having heard the same words from a girl standing nearby, Melinda does not believe her lover's excuse. She demands that he tell her the truth, and not fuss with banal excuses. Chris inhales, he apologizes to Melinda, and admits that he actually has feelings for one person. Slamming her hand on the bench, the girl does not give up. She wants to know who this man is, and if Chris does not tell her, Melinda will confess to him every day, and will do this wherever possible. Seeing the serious mood, the hero does not understand where to retreat and decides that there is only one way out. He decides that it would be better to lie, and in an impulse he shouts out that this person is Ninel Klaus. Hearing this, Melinda relaxed, saying that if it is Ninel, then everything is fine. She doesn't think that this girl knows Chris. In her opinion, the two of them cannot have any relationship. Besides, his chosen one is going to leave this school next year. Smiling sweetly, Melinda says that even if he doesn't like her now, she will definitely try to please him in the future. Running away, she joyfully shouts that she will come for the young man tomorrow morning. Chris does not understand what just happened. Sitting in his office in the evening, he doesn't understand why it didn't work out for him. It was an ideal refusal. Chris is almost sure that youth is also a problem. At the same time, the student council president, Tana Sinclair, enters the office. Seeing that the vice president is still there, she decides to sit on his desk and find out what he is doing here at such a time. He shudders and blurts out that he stayed to help with student council affairs, although in his head he asks himself if she herself doesn't know who left him working here late. Tana decides to tell him what a good person he is and hands him a cup of coffee as a reward for working overtime. The hero shrugs it off. He doesn't need it. His mother said that drinking coffee at night is harmful. Putting on an innocent face, she can't believe she was so kind and apparently no one appreciates it. These words are like an arrow piercing the vice president's head. He understands that this is a sly fox. Taking a mug of coffee and bowing his head, he promises that he will definitely remember the president's kindness. Tana is happy to hear the vice president say something about kindness. She is sure that he will reciprocate her feelings. During her speeches, Chris again saw another love letter on the table. Noticing the young man's curious gaze, Tana wants to know what her colleague thinks about love letters. These words take Chris by surprise. How can the president know that Melinda wrote him a love letter? Or maybe the love letter was written by Tana and she has now decided to come and remind him. The girl sees that the vice president is not answering her question for a long time and decides to ask it again. Such protrusions are too unfair to the young teenager. But at that moment, their intimate atmosphere is interrupted by a knock on the door and the question of whether the president is here. But she's not at all interested in that right now, and without hearing an answer, the girl decides that Chris wants her to hug him even tighter. Twirling the button on Chris's blouse, she talks about how petty the vice president is. She squeezes him even tighter in her arms. Chris says that he can no longer breathe. The employee nevertheless decides to open the door and finds the guys doing a very interesting activity. Out of awkwardness, he slams the door and runs away, while Chris tries to shout after him that he got it all wrong. Pulling away from the vice president, Tana breaks into a satisfied smile, saying that the problem is solved. She decides to explain herself, who, if not the vice president who receives many love letters, will be able to understand her. This information, of course, clarifies a lot for Chris, but she clearly did not think about his personal safety. Sipping her already cooled coffee, she wants to offer the young man her scent in return. Chris is already ready to defend himself from this fox. He wants to know what she is going to do. Tana grabs his hands and wants to know why he is looking at her like that. Is she really a sinner in his eyes? The girl takes her palms and brings them to his face, so that they cover his eyes, and asks him not to peek. And he says that if he dares to peek, it could cause a real bloody storm. Frightened, the main character even decides to turn away, while behind him the girl pulled her hair into a ponytail and began to take off her shirt. Next, Tana unzips her skirt, and Chris hears something light fall to the floor. He doesn't understand what the president was up to there, what that strange noise he heard was. The last step was to change his shoes. Tana playfully asks if he knows what that noise was. The vice president is already beginning to lose his temper, and at this moment a woman's hand is once again dragging him by the collar of his shirt. She turned him around on the chair and said that now he can open his eyes. Tana shows off in front of Chris and wants to know what he thinks, whether the dress suits her. Seeing this whole spectacle, the young man replies that she looks beautiful, but he wonders why she is changing clothes in the office again, because someone might see her. The president walks away and starts laughing. She apologizes and explains that she's in a hurry. She's having a dinner party at home today, so she doesn't know what to do. But to note, she did not change clothes in the office. This dress can be folded so that it fits into a school uniform. So she just takes off her uniform, and as she does so she starts demonstrating how she did it, and Chris starts waving his hands and asking her to stop and not continue explaining. In order not to seem rude, the young man says that she mentioned a dinner party and for some reason is in no hurry to attend. But then Tana remembers the torn button on the vice president's shirt. She sits down on her knees and puts her hands on Chris's neck, saying that he is very careless as a member of the student council. It is wrong to leave his discipline and button exposed like this. The girl carefully secures the tie with her hairpin, until the hero does not understand when his button managed to come off. Having finished, Tana prepares to leave and says in parting that this was an additional reward for the vice president for voluntarily agreeing to work overtime. After all this experience, the poor student simply cannot overcome his excitement and holds on to his tie. Walking along the corridor, Tana believes that this evening has already been a success, that she finally got it. Left in the office, Chris wonders who the second letter is from, if the president has nothing to do with it. In this letter, the girl invited him after school to a nearby cafe and even left a signature, 9K. Seeing this, the young man wondered if the queen of their school had really written to him. If you believe today's horoscope, then maybe another recognition awaits him. Already sitting in a cafe, Chris decides to break the awkward silence and find out whether Miss Ninel was looking for him. Leafing through the book, she mysteriously says that Melinda came to her today. But now this is not the most important thing for her. The most important thing is that Chris likes her. And then Melinda explained to her in detail his shortcomings and the reasons why she and he could not be together. From such words Chris even choked on his tea. Ninel wants to know if everything is okay with him. The young man clears his throat and, saying that he is completely fine, tries to explain that this is not what she thinks about. The girl suggests that he simply used her as an excuse to refuse Melinda. Chris bows to her and he is incredibly happy. The young man thanks her for her understanding. He leans even lower and apologizes for using what he likes as an excuse. Closing the book, Ninel looks at him and asks if he will be her boyfriend. Chris doesn't understand that he's in the Matrix and wants to know if the girl is joking with him. But she is quite serious, but she means for him to pretend to be her boyfriend. This will be beneficial for both of them, since Melinda, even after hearing his refusal, did not give up. If they pretend, then this is a way to make other people give up. But Chris is afraid that this may drive other people. But Ninel, sighing, says that her situation is much more complicated than his. She is about to leave and says goodbye, that this is just a proposal, and asks not to worry about it so much, but just think about it. The girl promises to meet him here tomorrow, and she will wait for an answer from him. The next morning, lying in bed, Chris, through his sleep, hears the ringing of an alarm clock and someone's steps approaching him. The girl carefully climbs onto his bed and approaches the protagonist's face. Feeling something pressing on his chest, Chris finally decides to open his eyes and sees his sister in a cat costume in front of him. The young man jumps up in surprise and asks why she's dressed like that again and what she needs again. The girl turns out to be unhappy because last night she went to bed without a bath and now she smells bad. Chris apologizes for causing such inconvenience to his little sister. She approaches him and, smiling, says that everything is fine and compliments that he smells very tasty. Grabbing her by the jacket, he drags her along and says that he won't bother with her, and now he's going to brush his teeth. While the brother is brushing his teeth, the sister is hanging on him and the hero wonders how long she is going to hang like that. She starts whining about how her brother doesn't even want to give her time to warm up. Her brother starts screaming that she shouldn't say such misleading words. Their screams could be heard even on the street. But instead of the morning squabbles, the little sister decides to thank her brother and prepares him breakfast with love. Chris tries the scrambled eggs and the girl says she's sure they turned out amazing today. As he finishes his next bite, he decides to ask how often people confess to his sister at school. This question shocks the girl. She says that this really happens. Chris grabs her hand and asks her to tell her how she usually responds to fans, and what to do if the other person does not give up even after rejection. Blushing a little, she always answers that she has a boyfriend, and if they don't believe her, then she shows a photo of her brother. She frees her hand and wants them to hurry up since they are already late for school. And Chris thought, perhaps what Ninel suggested was the only effective way. At the same time, Melinda is waiting for her lover and thinks why he has not come yet. But suddenly the door opens and Chris appears from behind it. Seeing the girl, he is surprised that she really came. Seeing her in archery club clothes, he decides to run away, as he was afraid that she had come by force to settle the matter with the rejected confession. Watching his betrothed move further and further, the girl catches up with him and lays him on the floor. At this moment Chris thinks at what point his life began to turn into a romantic comedy. Melinda drags him along, and the young man wants to know why she is leading him along, and how the girl turned out to be planning to arrange a date for them. But suddenly in the distance they notice a strange company of people. In the center of this meeting is a fair-haired youth. Seeing Melinda, he smiles and starts waving. But it seems that the student doesn't really like it, and her face immediately changes, and Chris wants to know who this guy is. Melinda turns sharply back and, with exclamations of admiration, addresses the hero as if he were her dear one. She grabs his hand and thanks him for seeing her off, and asks him because of the intense heat to wait backstage. Chris asks why she changed so suddenly. He even felt uneasy. In a whisper, the girl begins to threaten the young man. If he does not play along with her, the shooting club will take him and use him hostage as a target for training. Running away, she asks to look after her purse while she gets ready. Chris can only agree to her threats and requests. A fair-haired young man watched all this, and looking at all this, decides to say goodbye to his fans. He approached Chris and asked if he was the deputy chairman of the Cycle Polytechnic. The young man extends his hand to him and introduces himself by the name Ashton Ram. He had already heard about Chris from Melinda, and did not think that they could collide. He notices that while the young man was seeing the girl off, she caused him a lot of trouble, but since he was the one who invited Melinda, after the meeting he himself takes her back so that Chris does not bother himself. The main character thinks this is all one big manipulation, but Ashton continues to send him away, saying that if he is not interested in watching the performance, he can come back, and he himself will then explain everything to Melinda. Chris waves his hands away, moving away a little, says that he received an invitation from the student union, and as for who will accompany Miss Spring, it has nothing to do with him. And accordingly, Ashton too, he coldly says goodbye to his new acquaintance. This amuses Mr. Ram and most importantly, he has nothing to worry about. Watching this exchange, Melinda breaks into a smile. The performance continues. The girl is doing a good job of hitting the target accurately. But Chris, sitting in the hall, is just waiting for this performance to end. Due to his half-asleep state, Melinda's bag falls out of his hands and, having opened, all its contents end up on the floor. The young man's eyes widen and, collecting books, he discovers that in fact the girl has a bunch of books with her about methods of courting guys. While collecting accessories from the floor, he hears someone outside discussing the girl's appearance, saying that she takes advantage of her beauty and thinks that she is always right. Looking outside, Chris sees Ashton listening to a girl who offers to teach a lesson to one self-confident girl. Fans are getting closer and closer to their idol and say that the slap he received is not a trifle at all. Ashton dissuades them. He doesn't want them to look for problems on their own because of him, but the girls continue to insist that the scoundrel needs to understand that this cannot be done. Unnoticed, Melinda approaches Chris and she wants to know what he is doing here. The young man wants to know if she will believe him if he tells her gossip. By this time the girl has already thought that he is spying on other girls, but Chris replies that he has already seen so much of them today that his eyes are already calloused. Melinda quickly sits him down in a chair. She is glad of his revelation. After all, then he will look only at her. She wants to know if he understood her, to which the hero agrees. Melinda falls next to him on the bench and says that she took into account how peacefully he behaved today and played along with her. And now she is ready to reward him so that he can help a beautiful girl put on her socks. If he puts her socks on, he can go home. Having said this, the girl throws one leg over his thigh, but there is no joyful smile on Chris's face. Seeing this, Melinda removes her foot and is indignant, because her feet are clean, and besides, he didn't even ask why he was being rewarded. The hero clears his throat and tries to explain to her that apparently she misunderstood everything. He was about to say that he didn't even like this, but when he saw the drawn arrow in front of his face, he abruptly changed his answer to a more positive one. The young man immediately takes out his old socks from his bag and solemnly puts them on Melinda. Sitting down next to him, he says that putting socks on a beautiful girl is actually a great honor for him. Miss Spring is glad that he understands this. She leans a little on his shoulder and says that today she really wants to thank him for seeing her off. Chris wants to know if he and Ashton Ram really know each other so well. Hearing this, the girl even jumped up from her seat, wondering if her lover was jealous of her. She says that yesterday she met Ashton, a member of the shooting club from another school. She never really talked to him, but he asked her why she was still here at such a late time. And yesterday, when the performance was announced, he began to pester her. He was convinced that she stayed late to wait for him. That's why she slapped him. She doesn't know what he said to others, but today at the performance many were unhappy with her presence. Chris understands what is happening. People are discussing all this behind her back. He wants to tell her something else, but to his surprise he notices that the girl has fallen asleep peacefully on his shoulder. He takes her face in his hands and, moving it closer to him, tries to understand whether she is pretending to be asleep or not. Thinking that she really fell asleep, he lowers her head onto the briefcase and is about to leave. But when he hears a familiar female voice behind him shouting his name, he stops and Melinda rushes towards him. The girl is angry. In her opinion, Chris understands absolutely nothing about girls' hearts. If he noticed that the girl was sleeping soundly, shouldn't she be picked up and carried home? The young man smiles awkwardly and wants to know what this story is from some women's magazine. Melinda freezes in silent shock. Is it really her chosen one who has those magazines? After calling Chris a fool, she turns around and says that she will go home to change clothes. And she tells him to return to school alone. But for the hero this is not a problem at all. Walking on the way back, the young man thinks, despite the fact that Ashton deceived those girls, he feels ashamed of him. For some reason he himself must, at all costs, prevent the plans of those three against Melinda. But for some reason he was haunted by the feeling that something was wrong. When they met, he behaved in such a way that Chris would leave as soon as possible, most likely to give free rein to his fans. Meanwhile, the girls had already met, and the leader asked Melinda if she knew what was happening. The girl didn't even have time to really say anything before a slap landed in her face. The opponent says that this blow was for the head of Ashton. Rubbing her red cheek, the girl replies that trash usually likes to gather in a pile. The rival grabs her by the shirt and starts shaking her, asking who else is trash here. Melinda says that, of course, she means them and this Ashton, they are all a bunch of dirt. The girl again swings at the impudent woman and shouts for her to shut her mouth. But the blow did not happen, because out of nowhere Chris appeared behind her and grabbed her hand. He looks at the girls and wants to know if they really like being controlled. The girl gets out of his grip and also slaps him in the face, shouting that she and Ashton are connected by love, and he should not care about that. Chris looks at her with contempt and coldness, while Melinda wants to know if he is okay. She runs and takes his hand, saying that he is not to blame for anything, but he should leave. After listening to Melinda, he picks her up in his arms and invites them to leave here together. The student presses herself to his chest and, shedding tears, quietly agrees with him. The rival stands in bewilderment and shouts that they cannot leave so easily. But what about retribution? Chris sighs and aloud asks Ashton to come out already. Everything is bad enough, but if he finds him himself, it will be even worse. The enemy comes out and says that he did not expect this from the vice president, and immediately tries to shield himself. Allegedly not he started all this, but was simply passing by. The main character puts Melinda on the ground and hits his opponent in the face with all his might. Ashton flies away a decent distance, and sitting rubbing his cheek, he hears that Chris returned the slap to him. And he also wants the young man to think before he does something, and warns that he has a recording from the cameras of the sports complex, where he can be seen pestering Melinda. Ashton bows down before them like a puppy. He promises that there won't be a next time, while his fans are perplexed. Amid cries about what a loser he is and undeserving of their love, Melinda and Chris leave. The guys decided to take a break, and Miss Spring brings her savior an ice-cold cola to apply to the site of the blow. She also wants to know how he found out what the girls and Ashton were planning. Chris claims that he initially turned them against her by making them look pitiful, and then he wanted to pretend to be a hero who saved the beauty. This is a typical story from a manhwa. Melinda notes that her hero is smart enough to choose a different scenario. The girl announces that now if he is her hero, he must be responsible for her, and he is the one she will follow. Already at home while washing the dishes, he receives an angry message from Miss Spring, asking why he ran away after dinner. Chris is uncomfortable with this situation. but if he had not escaped, he would have died there on the spot. His little sister quietly approaches him and asks why her brother is chatting with a bad girl. The young man immediately begins to deny it and says that it was a message with an advertisement from the store, but her sister doubts her tone, and she really wants to see for herself whether he's telling her the truth, so she's trying to take his phone away. In the end, she was still able to pin him to the ground and ordered him to remain silent while she checked. The sister tries to unlock the phone and discovers that the password is not her birthday. Her brother is actually a fool and needs to be taught a lesson. She gets up from Chris and, spinning around, says that she believes in this is really an advertisement from the store. But for now, she wants to keep his phone and deliberately tries to put it in her chest so that her brother definitely does not dare to take it away. And apparently she slightly overestimated the size of her charms, because the phone simply fell back to the floor. Seeing how upset his little sister is because of this embarrassment, he invites her to do something else that she wants. The girl turns around in surprise and decides to ask him again, to which she again receives approval to do whatever she wants. Only when he was already lying on her lap did he understand what kind of incomprehensible anxiety was in his heart. Chris decides to clarify whether they are definitely brother and sister, otherwise how can she explain her rather strange hobby? Laying his head on the side, she reminds him that he himself allowed her to do what she wants. After all, when she helps clean others' ears, she experiences a lot of emotions. How could such a relaxing hobby be strange, the way he talks about it? Although Chris thinks it's strange, he also gets some pleasure from the dripping in his ears. He even closes his eyes. But when he opens them, he sees how the towel the sister was wearing almost no longer covers her body. He jumps up sharply. The food girl manages to pull the stick out of his ear. The little sister is clearly not happy with his attack. Chris explains that he just wanted to turn his back because he was going to send a message to one bad girl, and if his sister saw this, she would be very angry. But she doesn't seem to care and she just pulls him by the cheek and says that he can be on the phone. But why is he laughing at her? He receives messages from girls, but he is already tired of them and asks his sister Molly for permission not to go to school tomorrow. But she just leans towards his ear and asks in a whisper if he forgot that tomorrow is Saturday. And her tone suddenly changes to stern, because it turns out that he forgot that tomorrow he must go watch her performance. Chris immediately begins to make excuses that he remembers about the city dance competitions and he will definitely come to them. Although he forgot that tomorrow is Saturday, he felt that tomorrow there would be something important, so he was looking for an excuse not to go to campus. Molly looks at him with an all-consuming gaze, and wants to know whether his brother really promises to come, and the young man solemnly swears to her. She gets up and goes to bed, saying that they will see each other tomorrow evening at the theater. At the same time, the chairman writes to him, and she intends to meet with the vice president tomorrow morning, which Chris is not happy about. If Molly sees that the chairman will come to him in the morning, then he will not live. Already in the morning his sister writes to him that she is already at the theater and is going to the dress rehearsal. This is not without reason. Chris sent Molly to the theater in advance, and also hurried to the library to avoid danger, and saved himself from his sister's terrible wrath. Behind him, he hears the voice of the chairman. She hands him a mug and offers him coffee, which the young man is incredibly happy about. But suddenly he stops and realizes that there is some familiar feeling on his shoulder. The chairman's breasts have managed to rest on him, and she smiles and says good morning to Chris as he tries to come to his senses again. While eating still hot buns, the hero wants to know how Tana found out that he was hiding in the library. She also takes a bite of bread and asks if he knows why the hare falls into a trap so easily. The young man tries to hide from her malicious gaze and wants to know the answer to the question that she asked. Tana puts her hand on his arm and laughingly explains that the reason is that he is a coward. As soon as the hunter makes the slightest sound, the hare will immediately run in fear in the other direction. And at the same time, a smart hunter only needs to know the habits of a hare in order to set a trap. And then the hare falls into her of his own free will. Tana runs her finger over his lips and asks if her judgment is correct, and at the same time calls him a bunny. Now Chris fully understands where she is going with this allegory about hares, and he decides to ask why she, with such intelligence, has not yet found herself a boyfriend. Tana smiles playfully and says that if she really falls in love, then no one can escape her. Chris doesn't understand where this fox learns such things, why she smiles when she tells him all this, but the question still remains open. The young man wants to know why she was looking for him. The answer turns out to be much simpler than he thought. She wanted to see him and possibly go on a blind date with him. Chris understands that he urgently needs to get out of here, and, getting up, says that he is not feeling well today, so now they will have to say goodbye. The fox, as always, is not so simple, and placing a footrest under the table, knocks the young man off his feet. She manages to grab his hand and, pulling him towards her, puts it on her chest, while looking a little confused and asking the question if he wanted to grab her hand. And does he really want her to scream at the top of her voice right here right now? Sitting down at the table again, Chris thinks only about one thing: no matter how he screams now, he already feels as if she is a hunter, and he is really the same bunny whom she pulls by the ears. In the end, he has to apologize to her and tell her that he already feels much better. This news makes Tanu happy, and she says that he just needs to meet one person and that's all, he shouldn't be so nervous. Chris decides to tell her that she has no idea how many guys at school wanted to skin him when she used him as an excuse and he is not going to face certain death. Tana understands that you have to pay for everything, and demonstrates something that makes the hero's eyes light up with excitement. The one who goes to meet her today will receive this thing. Chris can't control himself because the reward is the game Signal Fire 4 re-release. The game isn't officially due out for another 3 months, and he wants to know where she got it from. The chairman breaks into a wicked smile again, because she knew that Chris loved this game. The young man bows to her and says that he will definitely go with her. These words cannot but please the girl. Walking down the street, Chris wants her to tell him about this terrible man, because the main character needs to know what to prepare for. Tana says that his family returned from abroad, is on the list of the best entrepreneurs in the world, does business with her family, and at the last banquet their parents drank too much and said that they were already at the age to get to know him better. This has already happened, but now she definitely has to refuse. Chris is wondering why not take a closer look at the young man. But this will not happen. Tana again embraces the hero, talking about how interesting Chris is, and that she has not played enough with him yet. The vice president now looks more like a tomato and awkwardly says that he doesn't understand why the chairman always says such strange things. Suddenly, the guys hear someone calling out to Tanu, saying that he did not expect such a meeting. This person turned out to be Ninal. Chris immediately wanted to know what she was doing here. Luckily for them, she was just passing by and remembered the discount coupons that she wanted to give to Chris and also reminded them to be sure to look at their expiration date. Ninal turns around and bids them farewell, saying that she doesn't want to distract the two of them from their date. The young man is ready to grab his heart, because the coffee coupon is a sign that she is still working, waiting for his answer this evening, and besides, his sister has a competition after lunch. He frantically checks the time on his watch and says out loud that he didn't expect that the man hiding in the shadows would have such a good relationship with everyone's desired beauty. He looks at Tanya for a couple of seconds and resolutely grabs her hand and drags her forward, saying that they are going on a blind date right now. Arriving at the meeting place, they see a young man who recognizes Tanu and wants to understand who came with her. But the girl can't even catch her breath to explain everything. Since Chris ran too fast, she could barely keep up with him. But she gathers her strength and introduces him as the deputy of the student council. They accidentally met on the street and decided to eat for free. Tana wants to know if Chandler minds. On the outside, the imperturbable young man says that Tana's friends are his friends, and, of course, he does not mind and even offers to sit down, but anger is boiling inside him. He does not understand how this freeloader dares to hold Tana's hand. Adjusting the ties on her sandals, the girl thinks about what a fool the deputy really is. It's obvious that he went with her to hide behind her as a shield. And now, to her surprise, he doesn't even mind talking to his rival. She decides to interrupt their conversation and suggests that Chris should have a little snack. After all, after lunch they will have many other important things to do. A vein on Chandler's forehead begins to bulge, seeing how close the guys are sitting, and the impudent guy even knows that this is his date. He decides to take the initiative and invites Chris to have a little drink and chat, since he doesn't know him very well yet. Chandler, talking to his interlocutor about what delicious dessert wine this restaurant has, discreetly slips his wallet into his jacket. The vice president is embarrassed because he doesn't really know how to drink, and the enemy insists that he'll just try it and nothing bad will happen. At the same second, Tana, on the contrary, imagines how she tastes a glass of this delicious wine and pretends to be drunk. She will be able to do a lot, and even despite this arrogant Chandler. Tana immediately supports the idea because good wine cannot be missed. Chris doesn't even believe that they will really drink it. Drinks are brought to them, and they solemnly raise their glasses to clink glasses. Tana decides that she will drink a little and then pretend to be drunk, but then she notices an interesting picture. Chris is already lying on the table, all flushed, and holding a glass in his hand, his little finger sticking out. Has he really already gotten drunk? Chandler says that it's all his fault. Why did he offer to drink? And promises to go and pay the bill and then send Chris home, and he and Tana can retire somewhere else. But the girl is already hugging the limp young man and asks Chandler not to talk like that. She was not in the mood to communicate with him before. The young man goes to pay the bill, and Chris presses himself even closer to Tanya, telling her how delicious she smells. This even begins to confuse the girl, and the hero wants to know if she can get up on her own. Since he seems unable to do this, Tana helps him get up. Suddenly, Chandler's wallet falls out of Chris's pocket, just at a convenient moment when the young man shouts to the whole audience if they have seen his wallet. He cannot find it. Chandler walks back to the table and picks up his wallet, saying that he was wondering why he couldn't find his item. But it turned out that Chris Brown secretly stole it. Continuing to lecture, he mentions that theft is a crime and they must obey the laws together. The main character still doesn't understand what's going on and offers to pay himself if his wallet was stolen. But Chandler doesn't need this, since his opponent continues to make a fool of himself. Then he'll just call the police and let them deal with him. Tanya does not like such conversations, and she asks him to stop, and if he continues the performance, then she will commit a real crime. The young man smiles and says that she herself saw how his wallet fell out of Chris's jacket. It seems to him that this kind of guy is not suitable for her. He didn't have time to finish what he wanted, because splashes of red wine were already flying into his face. Tana asks him if he has come to his senses and finished his performance. Defiantly putting her foot on the table, she wants to know who he thinks he is. She doesn't care about his dirty tricks and words towards her family, as long as he doesn't interfere in her life. Tana points the finger at Chris and warns that if Chandler ruins his future, she won't stand for it. It's good that she saw through it earlier, otherwise tomorrow there would be one more concrete pillar under the bridge. Feeling drops of wine running down his forehead, and clenching his teeth in anger, Chandler says that he understood her. Tana gently hugs Chris and asks him to ask, because all this happened through her fault. After leaving this seedy place, they decide to take a breather on a park bench. Chris gradually begins to come to his senses, opening his eyes from sleep. He wants to know what time it is. Upon learning that it is already 4 o'clock, he rises sharply and realizes with horror that he is late for his sister's performance. But to his happiness, Tana admits that she deceived him. She even laughs at the fact that she now understands how Chandler could set him up so easily. Chris doesn't quite understand what exactly happened, but the girl gives him advice to under no circumstances trust those who wear masks and smile, including her. Having relaxed a little, the young man, still a little drunk, thanks Tanu. The chairman says that in this case, as gratitude, he should give himself up. These words seem to make Chris sober up, and he says that he urgently needs to run to his sister's performance. But Tana catches up with him, and again taking his arm, says that so be it, and offers to go by subway. The hero tries to get out of it by saying that he only has one invitation card. But the chairman wouldn't be herself if she wasn't ready for anything. She pulls out 2 whole VIP tickets. Chris wants to know where she got them from. As it turns out, she needs the tickets for their next common goal and her father gave them to her. She once again wants to make sure that they will definitely go together, and since she left no room for retreat, Chris agrees with her. Walking along the alley, the young man wants to know whether it is necessary to hold him by the waist, to which the fox reminds him that he is still drunk. After some time on their way, Tana asks him to stop as her feet are tired from the heels. Without hesitation, she directly takes off her sandals and, finding herself barefoot, says that it will be much easier for her. Noticing Chris's surprised look, she decides to playfully ask where he is looking and whether her deputy has secret hobbies. Sitting in the theater hall, Tana sadly realizes that she wanted to find out about the vice president's secret hobbies, but did not expect that he would be so worried about her bare feet that he would give her his shoes. She notices that the young man is sitting darker than a cloud and his whole body is tense due to tension. The girl pokes him on the cheek and advises him not to be nervous, because it's his sister on stage, not him. But he suddenly gets up and points to the stage, shouting his sister's name. My brother noticed how during the dance the lacing on her dress began to come apart and was already exposing part of her body. Molly is immediately lost and simply stops dancing out of shame. No one understands how this could happen. Sitting in the dressing room, Molly hears another dance team being announced as the winner. Finally, her brother was able to get to her. Running into the room, he asks from the threshold if she is okay. Little sister throws herself into his arms while he asks why she's sitting here alone. The tearful girl admits that all her efforts went down the drain. Tana also sneaks into the dressing room and begins to pat Molly on the head, saying that she was on top, and all the questions are only about the costume. She also decided to mention that the deputy is now very worried. The little sister quickly steps aside with her brother, asking what this cunning fox forgot here. A verbal skirmish ensues between the girls. Molly immediately begins to be jealous. Chris, watching this, regrets that he could not immediately foresee their meeting. The sister grabs his hand and, pulling him along, says that it is time for them to return home. After all, next to them there is one bad and cunning lady, ready to eat him without a trace. But Tana does not intend to give up so easily. She asks her little sister to cool down. Since she treats Chris very well, the deputy finds himself between 2 fires. And she wants him to confirm that he treats her well and begins to press his hand more tightly to her chest. Already pouring out a cold sweat, the young man says that the chairman is really kind to him and in general, why don't they just live in peace and not quarrel? Molly ignores his words, as her gaze is riveted on how the sly fox is holding her brother hand. Unable to bear it, she stands between them and pushes them in different directions, shouting that they shouldn't be so close. Crossing her arms over her chest, Molly declares that only she can do this to her brother. At the same time, a joyful girl runs into the dressing room and, seeing Molly, shouts that she has finally found her. She picks up the artist in her arms and says how great it is that they took 4th place, but next year they will try harder. The girl does not understand what is happening and what is good in 4th place. Noticing that Molly is not alone, the girl greets everyone else. When she sees Chris, she says that his sister always talks about him, without even paying attention to others. Tana suggests that this even has a name, the older brother complex. The girl confirms that this is definitely about her friend. Molly yells at Terry to stop talking nonsense and they leave as they need to change in the locker room. While they leave, Tana decides to tell Chris that it was the girl who was in charge of the props for this performance. The vixen wants to know if the vice president understands why his little sister failed. Molly warns her brother to wait for her while she changes. Tana's words do not leave Chris alone, because they sounded quite reasonable. She is sure that Terry ruined the costume. Since being a member of the team, she was not annoyed by the loss, but on the contrary, she was very happy. It's not a sin to suspect something was wrong. But he needs to find out the motive for her concession himself. His head is tormented by questions, and Terry, noticing the depressed state of the young man, wants to know if he is upset by Molly's performance. He turns and agrees with her, because his sister worked tirelessly for 6 months, and in the end took 4th place. Sitting down next to him, the hero, as if by chance, decides to ask whether Terry checked his sister's costume well. This takes the girl by surprise. Stuttering, she begins to say that the dance costumes went through a very thorough check. She doesn't know how this could happen. Maybe the bright light on the stage was so hot that the threads began to melt. Chris realizes that something is really wrong here, and at that time he receives a call from Melinda. Having reached her, the girl wonders if he has died yet, and why he does not answer her messages. The hero reports that he is now in the theater. This immediately causes a negative reaction in Melinda. She has already managed to imagine that he went there with another girl. During the call, Chris has one idea, and he decides to act immediately. He says so that Terry can definitely hear that there are CCTV cameras behind the scenes. Then he begins to act out as if they are telling him that they have a recording and they were hit by a junior high school student. Melinda does not understand at all what Chris is talking about. She wants to know whether the young man is in his right mind. But he does not stop, but continues to play the role, telling them to wait for him and he will be there soon, and orders to call the police if necessary. Terry can't stand it and screams for him to stop, and for sure even grabs his sleeve. Crying, she admits that she set up her friend and this failure is her doing. Melinda, having listened to this entire monologue, already thinks that the police are using this code word and Chris Brown may have been kidnapped. Getting out of the bath, she rejoices that it is finally her turn to save the beauty. However, if she acts alone, she herself may fall into the same trap. Chris finally finds out Terry's true motive. It turns out that Molly swore that she would quit dancing if she took the prize. And in order for her to continue dancing, the costume designer decided to ruin her tutu. The girl confirms this. She asks Chris to ask her, because she just wanted his sister to continue dancing. The main character begins to have a headache from all this information. Terry swoops in and wants to know if he wants Molly to believe in her dream and keep dancing. The girl begins to scream about how much she adores his sister and her determination, so she is ready to do everything to support her. And in the midst of her fiery speech, she reveals that Molly decided to quit dancing because of him. Because the brother who does his best, the brother who tries hard, no matter what he is, the sister always follows him. And in order to keep up with her brother and care for him more, Molly decided to quit dancing. Her heart belongs to her brother. Even when she rejected Terry, she showed her a photo of Chris as the reason for the rejection. This conversation left a heavy aftertaste on the soul of the main character. Before leaving, the girl asked him if Molly quit dancing, would he be able to remain calm? Returning home, he carries her on his back and invites her to take a nap if she wants, but the girl refuses, because if she falls asleep, she will not be able to hold the umbrella and then her brother will get wet. Chris decides to ask if she really decided to quit dancing, and if she will regret her decision in her old age. Molly is surprised how he could know about this, because she didn't tell him anything like that, but he rats Terry out, who told him everything. The sister blushes and says that this is not true. Until she surpasses that girl and becomes the pride of her brother, she will not give up. Now Chris's thoughts are analyzing who the girl is that his sister is competing with. Time never changes anything, it only silently watches us from the side. 2 years have passed and Chris is no longer worried about her leaving, but those emotions will forever remain in his memory. It is for this reason that he no longer wants to hear any confessions. His sister notices his drooping state and immediately starts pinching his cheek, wondering if her brother is again thinking about that bad girl she casually mentioned. Chris refuses and says that this cannot be. He is now only thinking about what they will have for dinner. but Molly still has doubts. The brother says that choosing dances to surpass her is too childish. His little sister is really too young. Molly blushes and tries to calmly say that it's not all about her. Doesn't his brother remember how he talked about his life's work? Chris at first cannot understand what she is talking about, but suddenly he remembers that at one time he mentored his sister when they were little. One day he was watching his favorite superhero series, and his sister came running to him demanding to play with her. But at the same time, Mom calls Molly to get ready for dance class. An interesting thought comes to little Chris's head. He tells his sister that dancing should become her life's work. Wanting to get rid of this little thing and, having remembered a couple of adult phrases, he forced her to go to the dance. But the young man can't even imagine that these words will become a motto for her in life, and she will begin to dance diligently. Molly begins to wonder if her brother has really forgotten about his instructions, and he doesn't care about his little sister at all. Chris laughs. Of course he hasn't forgotten. Those were his favorite words from the first episode of his favorite superhero show. Their conversation is interrupted by the roar of a car behind them. The bright headlights hit their eyes and a car passing next to them quickly rolls through a puddle. Molly wants to put herself forward to protect her brother from these splashes, but the elder does not allow her to do this and, on the contrary, exposes himself to the blow. Already at home, the girl blames her brother. She had an umbrella, and he turned straight towards all the splashes. She is unhappy that every time he tries to save everyone from unnecessary trouble. It's the same with dancing. Every time, tired after his classes, he still goes to meet her. Molly admits that with all her heart she wants to take care of her brother, but instead gives him trouble. That's why she told Terry that she wants to quit dancing. Chris gently takes her face and says that when he became her brother, he immediately realized that he had to take care of her. He continues to pat Molly on the head, saying that she cannot quit dancing. Today she took 4th place, but she must definitely surpass that girl. The sister begins to yell at her brother for spending the whole day with the fox and now using tricks. Chris laughs and says, wasn't she the one who declared that her life's work was to surpass her rival? But Molly has already moved closer to him and offers to help him dry, since he is all wet. Chris tries to refuse, but his sister asks him not to say anything stupid, and even throws him on the sofa. Molly starts tickling his stomach under his shirt, and coupons fly out of his pockets as he tries to get out of this torture. Seeing them, he remembers that he had completely forgotten about the appointment with Ninel. He quickly gets ready and goes to the meeting place. Fortunately there he finds the girl reading a book. She asks him from the doorway if he has solved the problem. Chris is in a stupor. How did she know that he would be delayed? To which Ninel shows him the phone, where Melinda has already told everyone that he was kidnapped. The girl says that Miss Spring asked if she should call the police, but she stopped her. The young man understands that excessive concern also leads to excessive worry. And if he doesn't solve the problems now, there will be even more of them in the future. Ninel finally wants to know what decision he made in response to her proposal. Early in the morning, while walking along the corridor, Chris stumbles upon Melinda waiting for him. He is shocked and wants to know what time she got up and why she came here so early, but the girl pretends that she doesn't understand what he's talking about. They just met by chance. And since they met, she needs to know what they did with Ninel last evening, and when she found him, and also why he didn't pick up the phone. The hero would like to avoid this conversation and therefore simply replied that they discussed some matters with her and nothing more. The girl jumps back and starts rummaging through her bag, saying that yesterday she guessed everything herself, because Chris is so passive and this probably suits his hobbies. So she prepared this for him. Melinda takes out bondage and handcuffs from her bag, and then he decisively invites the young man to try all this. The hero has no idea where she learned all these things. Melinda takes out an erotic manual and says that she learned most of it from here, but figured out everything else herself. Unable to listen to all this anymore, much less participate in it, Chris runs away from there. But Melinda doesn't even think about leaving him alone and gives chase to him to see if he really doesn't want to try. Ninel notices them catching up from the window. Chris tries to tell her that he is on duty today and needs to go urgently. He manages to break away from his pursuer, and she begins to scour the bushes in search of her lover. The young man hid in one of the classrooms and watched from the window as his search progressed. At this time, he receives a call from the chairman. She wants to know how her dear deputy spent the weekend. Chris says he had a great weekend thanks to her. That's what he said out loud, but in his head he cursed her. Because of this fox, he'll be eating Molly's fried celery for a whole week. Tana is happy and asks her to solve one problem at the tennis club since he is in such a good mood, and promises to treat him to coffee later. But there was no answer to her proposal. The only thing she heard was that his phone was dead and how Chris was imitating beeps. This arrangement does not suit the chairman, and she instructs the Mandarin to check on Chris Brown in the class. A girl named Cleo Wei is the head of the student union self-government department. With the nickname Mandarin, she happily agrees to fulfill the request. The young man no longer wants to interfere in someone's problems, and so on-campus dangers await him from all sides. And now someone came into the class and abruptly tried to take the sponge away from him. To his joy, it turned out to be Ninal. She came to find out if Melinda was running after him this morning. Since they started cooperating with him last night, why not take advantage of their fake relationship today to correct this misunderstanding? The young man agrees. Seeing that Chris was very embarrassed, she decides to come closer to him. At the same second, Tana comes in with a mountain of books and starts talking about how long she has been waiting for the deputy. But after seeing this picture, her hands automatically dropped, letting go of everything. Then Melinda runs into the office, joyfully saying that she has come up with something new. Now the two of them watched as their lover kissed the queen of the school, Ninal. But everything turns out to be a little simpler. The girl, approaching his face, says that he has chalk in his hair. She even stands on her toes to look a little more. Chris perceives this as another test for him. Melinda cannot bear the first such heart wound. She cries and runs away. The chairman acts more restrained. She asks for forgiveness and, saying that she's had enough, also disappears behind the door. Having shaken the young man off the chalk, Ninal moves away and says that it seems she heard the voices of Melinda and Tana. Chris doesn't even know how he feels. It's probably all for the best. In the morning he didn't know how to refuse the girl, and now he's randomly gotten rid of the burden that was on his soul. Ninal invites him to go with her to the literary club, as they need to discuss something. Approaching the Ninal club, the guy called out, noticing Chris. He wants to ask him to leave, because he needs to personally discuss the issues of the literary club with the girl. Ninal's gaze changed sharply. She began to look hopefully at her ally, giving him a signal. Chris shields her and, turning to the guy, says that since we are talking about the club, he should have nothing to hide. The young man is dissatisfied with who the deputy thinks he is. He accuses him of wanting to take advantage of his position in the student union to give them orders. The girl decides to take the initiative into her own hands and, turning to the young man, says that the deputy of the student union is also her boyfriend. The guys move on. These words cooled the young man's ardor so much that he even dropped all the papers from his hands. Entering the reading room, Chris suddenly sees Ninal bowing before him and asking for forgiveness. She apologizes for her willfulness. The hero tries to calm her down, saying that everything is fine and this was the only way to solve the problem. Next, Ninal decides to clarify the question of what couples usually do. She thinks that going to school and back together will not be enough to deceive everyone, so she invites him to join a literary club so that they can spend more time together. Chris immediately agrees on this. Besides, there is something else. Yesterday, when she was researching the relationship between couples, she came across a pink app in which lovers leave their mark and invites her to try it out. Chris is thinking about this too. He also doesn't mind doing all this for authenticity. Having clarified these questions, Ninal approaches him and asks him to bow his head again. She asks him not to move and Chris's body seems to turn to stone, obeying her command as she kisses his neck. Now a scarlet kiss could be seen on the young man's neck from under his shirt. Ninal is pleased with her work, using bright lipstick. Now everything looks more realistic. Chris praises her for being so well prepared and now he can rest easy. The girl sits down and says that today she still has some things to do, and starting tomorrow they will start going to school together. Already on the way back home, the main character began to analyze what he was thinking about. If he joins the literary club, he will become its deputy. As soon as the chairman finds out about this can be considered the date of his death sentence. He wanted to solve the problem, but as a result he got into even more trouble. Is this really the typical life of a student? Even the way home was no exception for him, because out of nowhere Melinda landed next to him and needed to talk to him. After picking up his drink order, Chris heads to the waiting girl, whose thoughts scream only about love. Approaching, he hands her a glass, and she abruptly snatches it out of her hands, offended. Melinda looks up at him and wants to know how long she and Ninal have been together. Chris, without hesitation, replies that they started dating yesterday. Now the girl understands what they discussed that evening. She decides to ask if she can call Ninal now and say that she and Mr. Brown are on a date. The young man simply replies that his girlfriend is a rather understanding person. Frowning, Melinda says that she likes him much more than his Ninal. Chris conveys that his girlfriend considers him a person who is worthy of her trust and that is enough for him. Melinda admits that when they met a few years ago, she too immediately trusted him. Looking into the distance at the fading sunset, she says that in the future Ninal will sit in her place and eat ice cream with him. Saying this, a lump comes to her throat, and tears begin to flow from her eyes. She promises that she will definitely follow her lover. The ribbon on her hair has come undone and asks Chris to help her with this task, which is already familiar to him. As he ties a neat bow on her long pink hair, a thought occurs to him. Now he doesn't have to do this anymore. He clarifies whether he tied it well, and in response the girl hums quietly. Could this be the last time they interact like this? Melinda quickly grabs his hand and starts crying bitterly, saying that obviously this is not their last date. She doesn't want to part with him. She starts pounding on Chris's chest, screaming that he should die. If she knew, she wouldn't have fallen in love with him. This explosion of emotions actually calms the main character. In fact, it is in the order of things. When she held back and silently shed tears, it was unbearably painful for him. The outburst of emotions calmed him down slightly. It was all over. As long as their fake relationship continued, this problem would solve itself. Returning home, he refuses ice cream, citing stomach pain, and continues to think that his story with Melinda will end, and then everything will fall into place. Memory remains in the past, and life is expected in the future. For Miss Spring he will become just a speck of dust, and that's enough. His sister decides to distract him from his lyrical thoughts by quietly sneaking into his room and throwing the blanket over him. Getting out of bed, Chris wants to know what she's doing here. Molly reminds him that he talked about the pain in his stomach. She wanted to cover him with a blanket, and if he was upset about something, then she could stay with him. He looks at his sister and his soul feels better from such a caring person next to him. Going out the next morning, he felt an eerie atmosphere in the air, and his premonition clearly did not let him down. Two guys stop him halfway and want to know if he is pestering Ninel, since according to rumors the pervert Chris Brown grabbed her and forced her to do whatever he wanted. But they didn't scare the main character. He gives them the highest marks for acting and a transferable gum tattoo on his arm. They have a discipline test this month. The guys simply accept their revelation and are sincerely interested in whether he is dating Ninel. But as always, the hero of the so-called celebration appears on time and apologizes to Chris for being late. The pursuers, seeing this, fall to the ground and believe that their relationship is real, true. Ninel looks at Chris and wants to know if these people are causing him trouble. The young man refuses, but thanks her for her help. The girl is happy and, as a thank you for waiting, hands him a gift. She brewed tea with lemon for him. They continue to play pranks on the couple, and Chris also decides to take action and offers to help her carry her bag. But Ninel does not want to bother him. The young man quietly whispers to her that couples usually do this and the girl agrees to his proposal. He happily takes her bag, but does not expect such weight and falls sharply down. Several books fell out of the backpack and the hero wonders why she needs so many of them. Reading the serious titles of works, Chris thinks that only with the help of such a book can he fall asleep for a whole semester, and the thought also occurs to him that the girls from the literary club wear such bags to keep themselves in shape. Noticing the expression on the young man's face, Ninel wants to know if he thinks that literature is difficult to understand. Scratching his head, he's a little embarrassed to admit that for a techie like him, this really isn't easy. Touching his torso, she explains that literature has never looked down on life and has not been divorced from the masses. At any time, literature has reflected human life. People's experiences, feelings and emotions are the source of both life itself and literature. In other words, she wants to say that literature is the science of man. Even artistic fiction is one of the possible manifestations of a person's life, and the expression of what is in his soul is his own literature. She understands that she has already bombarded the hero with abstruse words and, apologizing, begins to stroke his head, and paraphrase that from the point of view of materialism, an expression of what is in his head. Chris removes her hand and awkwardly admits that even so he didn't quite understand her. Deciding to make things easier for him, she asks, for example, if he thinks he likes Melinda Spring. He remembers that they have actually known her for a long time, and as a friend she is an interesting person and very cheerful. However, if we are talking about love, then this is the limit, so it is better for them to remain friends. Ninel invites him to express such feelings in a story that she will look forward to, but Chris doesn't even want to waste paper on such trifles. But their idyll is interrupted by the Mandarin, shouting the name of the deputy, saying that the student union is about to fall apart, and he, you see, is on a date. She starts rushing towards him, saying that she wants to know what color his blood is. The girl is simply angry. Chris immediately takes off. The Mandarin's hand was about to grab the fugitive, when suddenly she received a click from Ninel. At this time in the office, Tana is experiencing her not the best state and looks at the same button from Chris's shirt. The young man nevertheless decided to follow the pursuer and find out why she was talking about the collapse of the student union. The Mandarin turns to him and asks if he thinks that the chairman did not find out about him and Ninel. He tells her about the situation that happened yesterday in class with Ninel. He saw Tanu, but she immediately ran away. Cleo looks him straight in the eyes and sarcastically declares that now he will go apologize to the chairman. Patting him on the head, she jokingly says that she will be his harakiri assistant, and then Tana may forgive him. Obeying and trailing behind the Mandarin, the young man does not understand why all this and what awaits him next. Cleo goes and mutters under her breath that one is stupid and the other is cowardly. The girl understands that she will not allow a bad outcome. She kicks down the door and literally pushes Chris forward. And then she sharply locks the door from the outside. the hero shouts for her to let him out. The Mandarin duck warns the boys that if they do not resolve anything between each other, she will not let them out, even if they die of hunger. Chris turns around and meets Tana's gaze. He hoped to avoid this meeting for as long as possible. The chairman is the first to decide to start a conversation, and she wants to find out if he decided to visit her himself, because this rarely happens. Seeing a pile of papers on the table, Chris wonders what the 38th parallel is, as the borders between South and North Korea are called. Tana tries to defend herself by saying that the filing cabinet was broken, so she had to put all the papers on the table. Taking the papers, the main character says that if she came up with the idea of lumping everything into one pile without checking the documents, then she must be just a professional in catching fish with her hands. The chairman decides to point out that he means that in his absence she is slacking off. Chris wants her to confess if she is training him to be a wage slave in a company with a 12-hour work schedule. Tana calms him down and says that she wouldn't speak in such boring phrases. He wants to know why she is doing this to him. The girl points out that there is another reason for this. Turning it over on the table, she quietly says that she really likes him. These words take the young man by surprise. But he, with a straight face, says that he is forced to reject her proposal. While the hero is trying his best to restrain himself and remain calm, Tana says that she can't help herself. This is because the deputy really loves to eat fish, and if someone likes a person, then you like everything connected with him. So she constantly catches fish with her hands to please the deputy. Chris believes that this is not a reason for shirking work. These are all her typical fox tricks. The chairman says that looking at the deputy, she did not think that she would be right. The Mandarin duck turns to Tanya from behind the door, saying that it was precisely this behavior that led to today's situation. The chairman approaches the door and the redhead, speaking, shouts that in the whole world there is only one person left who does not yet know. Tana blushes and says that she doesn't know what to do if everything has already led to this result. The tangerine grabs her hand and explains that he doesn't know yet, but she's afraid to say it, and Cleo wants to volunteer to help now, because this needs to end. Miss Sinclair pushes her assistant outside to talk to her alone. Mandarin pets her on the head and wants to know how much longer she will play the old maid. The girl doesn't think that she wants this of her own free will. Tana asks if she thinks that she should take him away from someone else. The Mandarin is not against this, she can even provide support, but she does not think it is worth going that far. After talking a little more, the chairman returns to the office and orders to continue working and return to discussing financial reports. Chris turns and looks at her intently, wondering if she wanted to talk to him about work. And yet, he wants to know if everything is okay with her. Meanwhile, Tana listens to her friend's prompts from behind the door, who tells her to say that this is a woman's secret and he should not ask unnecessary questions. The tangerine unlocks the door and warns that she is going to go to the swimming club while they sort it out. Tana orders him to urgently get down to business and not waste time on empty chatter. After all, these association procurement applications expire in a week. If they are not approved today, then it is better to blow up the college before the leaders simply kill them. The chairman whispers something about how the Mandarin fish constantly catches fish with its hands, and this is already too much. Chris thinks that the same can be said about her. The girl decides to get down to work and review everything together with her deputy. It turns out that the swimming club wants to buy new equipment, and the tennis club also wants to change rackets, and the management agrees to this. The girl reads clearly with a hint and wants to know what the deputy thinks about subscribing to the magazine for the literary club. This makes Chris nervous, but he is all for signing this document. But Tana doesn't think so. Literature is an insignificant thing for their students. They need to study more in their specialty, and she decides to disband this club. Hearing this, Chris tries to stop her hand from signing this order. He asks her to treat all clubs equally seriously, and, taking the documents from her, says that now she will verify, and he will approve. But Tana wants to entrust him with one task that requires the help of such a strict deputy. After all, only he can help them meet this Saturday. Chris understands that these are her fox tricks again. At the store, Molly tries to get her brother to try on pink swim trunks, but he refuses, since he already has swimming trunks, and he only wore them once. Does he need another one? His sister insists that they are needed since those other swimming trunks are missing. He himself said that he has swimming as a physical education this semester, so he definitely needs them. Chris wants to know where they might have gone. He already put them in his bag last week. Rummaging through his bag, he stumbles upon the thermos that Ninel gave him, and realizes that if Molly sees this, she will kill him on the spot. The young man hides the bag behind his back and admits that it is better to buy new swimming trunks since the old ones are lost, but his sister already suspected something. She wants to look at the bag and make sure that he is definitely not hiding anything from her. The brother tries to get out and says that in his bags there is actually a super scary bug that looks like an octopus, and it seems to be predatory too, and if she sees him at night, she definitely won't sleep. My sister says out loud that she believes him, but inside she understands that this is complete nonsense, and she still strives to see what her brother is hiding from her. But then, to her shame, Chris asks how she can know about the missing swimming trunks, and if his little sister did something bad behind his back. Her expression turns mischievous and the demon in her awakens. She decides that if he really wants to know, then she will speak very loudly. The brother understands that this is all not good and, seeing the emotions on her face, he asks her to tell only without strange things. She admits that his swim trunks went missing last week and she gets a little quiet and starts to blush. Molly continues the story. She put on a skirt, but could not find her shorts, and his swimming trunks conveniently fell into her hand. So she put them on without much hesitation. They were a little tight. Chris says that's enough and he'll buy new swim trunks, and since they're here, would she like to buy herself a swimsuit? This becomes a revelation for Molly. Does her brother really want to watch her change clothes? Chris tries to make a joke of it all, saying that she thinks about things that children shouldn't think about, and he doesn't have such strange predilections, but she wants him to admit whether he has never thought about this. After all, it seems that her brother is just thinking about what he shouldn't think about. In his head, Chris has already called her a little imp. The girl carefully compares swimsuits and looks at the prices. The hero is afraid that the price tag will confuse her. But, however, he remembers that Molly has been saving money for quite a long time and she must have quite a large stash. He would even call her a little rich woman. He wants to find out from his sister how much she has already saved, but the answer doesn't suit him much. Molly mentions that it's still not enough. It's barely enough for the thing she wants. She wonders if her brother wants to know why she is saving such a large sum, although she is not yet ready to talk about it. But her brother cuts her off, saying that he doesn't want to know, although in his thoughts he would really like to know. But no matter how close they are, they must have their own secrets. Moreover, it may be the biggest secret associated with teenage romance, or with legends about demons, as well as a secret power that can save the world. In any case, his sister cannot be ordinary. Molly looks at him with eyes full of love and thanks him for respecting her. Chris realizes that one thing he is sure of is that his sister is pretty damn cute. He invites her to pay for her new swimsuit with her own money, since she is saving hers. He takes one swimsuit from her hands, but immediately realizes that this swimsuit is too revealing. And even if he sits well on Molly, there will definitely be a person with bad intentions and this cannot be allowed. He hands her another cheaper swimsuit, for which the girl calls him greedy and retires to the fitting room. While waiting for Molly, someone's handbag suddenly lands in Chris's hands. The owner of the bag comes up to him and says that Melinda has not gone to school for 2 days, and today she has already gone to school for the 3rd day. They have already interviewed everyone in the college and he just seems to know where she lives. Besides, the student union is obliged to serve the students, so he has to hand over all these notes to Melinda. This task was entrusted to him by someone from above and refusals are not accepted. Chris only thinks about how tall his interlocutor is. The girl says goodbye to him and adds that he must deliver it by dinner and he must not be late. Molly comes out of the fitting room and wants her brother to evaluate her outfit, but notices that he is holding a black handbag. She immediately wants to know where it came from, whether a bad girl gave it to him, and if he doesn't give her a reasonable explanation, then let him not blame her for cruelty. Chris, running out of the store, manages to shout that he has urgent business, and he will explain everything to her. Standing in front of the mansion, he realizes that compared to his sister's pursuit and the cruel punishment that awaits him at home, handing over these notes to Melinda is the most troublesome task. Still, she did not go to school, probably because he broke off relations with her. Chris is trying to figure out how best to give them to him and what he should say when he meets her and tries to rehearse it. Only delusional ideas come into his head, which depress him. He goes through options, but cannot come to anything. He tries to express his embarrassment, but suddenly the sound of heels was heard behind him and someone called out to him, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. At the same time, Molly sends her brother a photo in a swimsuit and says that she has already prepared dinner for them. Chris, having received the photo and messages, cannot contain his embarrassment. The young man is seated at a table in the hall. Melinda's aunt named Chica met him. She sent the girl to the store and warns that she will return soon. Chica invites Chris to have dinner with them. He thanks her for the invitation, but says that he has things to do at home. The woman loudly places her mug on the table and declares that she needs to find out something from him. She heard that a few days ago, someone dared to reject her daughter, and now she wants to find out what happened. Chris's hands begin to shake, and he tries to pretend that he doesn't understand what she's talking about. Chica approaches the young man and then he gives up and says that household chores will wait for him, and he can stay with them. The aunt changes her face and, putting on an apron, declares that he will soon appreciate her culinary skills. Chris realizes that he has already gotten himself into trouble. Finally, Melinda comes home from the store and shouts to her mother that she bought onions. Walking into the hall, she freezes when she sees Chris sitting on the sofa, who awkwardly greets her. She runs to her mother's kitchen, fearing that her brain has already begun to melt. Chica comes out at the cry of her child. Clinging to her mother, Melinda cries that she was hallucinating and saw the same one on their sofa. The mother decides to play along and confirm that her daughter is really out of her mind. She invents that the doctor gave her a certificate with a diagnosis and told her to report when her emotional state stabilizes. Melinda was scared and wants to know what to do now. Chica turns her and tells her to wait until the illness passes. But for now, go have fun with your hallucination in the room until she calls you for dinner. The girl and Chris walk into the room and sit down on the floor. Melinda greets him like he's a hallucination. The young man doesn't understand why the hell he's a hallucination. The main character decides to ask how she is feeling and say that her classmates gave her notes. But Melinda does not go out of character and still says what a cool hallucination she has. The young man begins to get scared that she really may be out of her mind due to her illness. He tries to hand her the notes, but she refuses, because if the girl touches him, the illusion will disappear. Therefore, until he disappears, she will not touch him. She loves Chris with all her heart, and she will not allow the wonderful illusion to disappear. Melinda gets out of bed and steps on the mysterious toy. And unnoticed by her, he tries to go further, but slips on her and flies back. She lands head first right on Chris's dignity, causing him hellish pain. Melinda suddenly turns over on her stomach and begins to beg Chris not to disappear. And only after a couple of seconds, it dawns on her that this is not a hallucination, but a real original. She flies out of the room screaming, afraid that he saw her without makeup and in such clothes. The girl already thinks that she will never get married. Chica, coming out of the kitchen, says that since Chris left this mess, let him clean it up himself. The young man had already thought that his aunt could be a relative of Tana. She was as formidable as the white-haired fox. The main character understands that his problem has returned to its original state. Point: how can he get along with Melinda? Chris reaches the door to her room, knocks and asks if she is there. He caught an unfortunate moment when the girl decided to change clothes, and, confused, she even shouted out that he was mistaken. The young man was about to go into the living room, when he suddenly noticed a crimson stain similar to blood beginning to flow from under the door of the room. The most terrible thoughts creep into his head. He knocks down the door to the room and shouts that Melinda should not do this. But to his surprise, the girl sits peacefully on the bed, having managed to put on her pajamas at the last moment. Seeing Chris, she tries to hide and say that there is no Melinda here. She begins to talk about herself in the third person, mentioning that she has a normal temperature, and the doctor said that tomorrow she will be able to go to school. The young man also managed to find out what kind of red liquid was flowing out from under the door. It turned out to be just juice. He decides to point out this little misunderstanding to Melinda. The girl suddenly jumps out of bed and runs, flashing her piggy panties. Picking up the box from the floor, she opens it and breathes a sigh of relief. The cupcakes turned out to be in perfect order, not wrinkled and still fresh. The girl runs back to the bed. She places the box in front of Chris and invites him to try one of these delicious cupcakes. The hero takes a bite and says that it is very tasty, and he has never tried anything like this. Melinda proudly states that she is the one who baked these cupcakes, and in truth, she is a member of the student bakery club. Chris notes that she said that she is not Melinda, so is there really another honorary member in the club? The girl turns away embarrassedly and quietly says that it was Melinda who asked him to tell him this, because she is not here. Chris tells her that she needs to end this, because they are already college students and maybe they won't play these childish games. Miss Spring reads lines from the song where it says that someone falls in love, and someone goes to the sea at night. She says that Melinda also wanted to convey this. He listens as the girl continues to read the lyrics to him and, gathering his strength, asks her for forgiveness. Melinda says that he shouldn't apologize because these are just lines from a song. Now she is more interested in finding out how things are going with Ninal. Chris calmly says that everything is fine with her, but Melinda objects and says that this is not possible. After all, if he were her boyfriend, she would never have let him fall in love with another girl, especially when this girl confessed her feelings to him. Chris embarrassedly says that he was asked, so he came here. Melinda is happy that he finally changed the subject, and besides, she understands that she urgently needs to change her clothes. The young man wanted to start talking again, but turning around, he thought that Melinda was upset again and, turning away, was sitting and crying. What bothers him is that he hasn't even said anything yet, and she's already started crying harder. He puts his hand on her head and offers to talk to her face to face. He removes her pig cape and realizes that the girl was just changing under her. Melinda screams and orders him to close his eyes. In the end, the embarrassment between him and Miss Spring seemed to disappear thanks to the notes. Besides, Aunt Chica invited him to work in their store for the weekend. and he was forced to agree. This was of course a sign of another hassle, but he did not refuse them. Perhaps all this is due to fear. If you think about it, he still broke her daughter's heart a few days ago. On the other hand, he brazenly entered someone else's house, brazenly ate someone else's dinner, and brazenly took other people's things, so it was difficult to refuse. Thinking about all this, he suddenly stumbles upon Ninel on the street. She stroked a cute red cat, who liked her caress so much that he decided to crawl under her sweater. Chris wants to know why she's in no hurry to get home. She replies that while there was a break in the library, she wanted to finish the book and return, but the cat decided to interfere with her monologue when he saw Chris. And trying to jump out of the jacket, he involuntarily pulled Ninel towards the young man. The cat clearly enjoys the warmth between the two people and she begins to purr loudly with pleasure. Chris helps pull the Fluffy out from under his jacket and says that he doesn't have to play pranks, and Ninel suggests that he might be hungry. The Tangerine is watching the couple from around the corner, hearing their conversation and trying to immediately report everything to Tanya. The observer noticed that they were now behaving rather strangely with restraint for a couple in love, although everything was conducive to this. She approaches the cat and thanks him for his good service today. This lump turns out to be a freelance student union member named Cookie. Chris finally made it home and just wants to lie quietly in his room. His sister reports that she is very late. Today she and her classmates are going on a picnic, so she will stay at Terry's for the night. Molly declares that in her absence he cannot dine on instant noodles and bring girls home. Hearing the front door slam shut, Chris even becomes sad. She left, and he was left all alone. But his sadness did not last long. He arranged a holiday of loneliness for himself, and to this is also added a holiday of video games. As he opens a can of chips and drinks a Coke, he hears the doorbell ring and thinks it must be Molly who forgot something. But the chairman appears behind the threshold, who greets him and hands him some kind of bag of food. Chris is not happy about uninvited guests and tries to close the door quickly. Tana starts bombarding him with questions about whether he's finished rechecking and asks if he forgot that someone has something important to do today. Chris is just ready to howl with despair, and says that something has blinded his eyes and now he can't see anything. Tana asks him not to be a fool, but to let her in. The young man is against it because his sister forbade him to let girls in. The neighbor notices this strange struggle and, after greeting Chris, she makes the guys very embarrassed. The young man greets his aunt, and she notes how beautiful his girlfriend is. Chris laughs and tries to explain to her that she misunderstood and this is not his girlfriend. These words clearly hurt Tanu, and at this time the aunt still does not believe the young man's words. Mr. Brown is already horrified that this fox is playing her act again. The neighbor promises him that she will not tell his parents about her. He pushes Tana into the apartment, shouting to the neighbor that they were just fooling around and won't bother her anymore. Slamming the door, he tries to catch his breath and recover from this stress, which the fox once again caused him. Tana, smiling, notes that she didn't say too much, but Chris shouts that she took control of her aunt with one scene. Sitting down in a chair, she reports that she woke up early today to tell him about business and buy cookies, and still was condemned by him. As she puts the cookie in her mouth, she invites Chris to try it too. But the young man is ready. Maybe this is her trick to take a couple of ugly photos with him again. If she wanted to mock him, she was already an eternity too late. Tana moves closer and says that he should definitely try these very expensive cookies. The young man gives up, and having already gathered his courage, reaches out to bite off a piece of this delicacy. Chris tries to take a bite of the cookie, but Tana jumps away from him, leaving him with nothing. She did a trick with him and now wants the deputy to guess where the cookie went. Tana reaches out and pulls out the cookie from behind his ear, but doesn't calculate the load and leans a little on Chris, dropping the sweet from her hands. Being so close to each other, embarrassment takes over them and an awkward silence hangs in the air between them. The confusion of the guys was not without reason. While Tana pulled out a cookie and leaned on Chris, he sharply turned his head and accidentally kissed her on the cheek. The young people immediately turned away from each other, blushing with embarrassment, and Chris was the first to apologize for his misconduct. He pleads guilty because he thought the cookie was behind her ear. Chris reminds him that it's already quite late. The young man wants to go change clothes and come back, but the president gets up from his chair and, grabbing his hand, stops him from running away. After all, has he really just kissed her and is now planning to run away? In addition, she calls him a heartless bastard. Next, Tana continues to tell tales about how her mother told her that she would have to live her whole life with a guy who would kiss her, but Chris is not such a fool as to believe in these far-fetched family traditions. The guys decide to go shopping, but the main character is interested in the question of why Tana doesn't just order a wardrobe on the internet. Her arguments for buying in reality are that they will use the cabinet for a long time and therefore it is better to choose in person. The president already liked one option, and she ran to look at it as quickly as possible, at the same time calling Chris to her. She lost sight of him only for a second, and eventually caught him in the glass ball. Putting on his hood, he poses as a magician and says that he has never told his secret, and usually he keeps a low profile, but in reality he is a moon lord. Tana doesn't waste a second, takes it and starts filming this performance. Chris continues to sing a ballad about the Lord of Light and Darkness, and how he was nicknamed the God of Eternal Night. The girl adds fuel to the fire and admires him, asking what the God of Eternal Night is capable of. The young man declares that he turns blood into wine, his voice is like a knife, and his whisper is lightning that illuminates the whole world, and when he falls asleep, the all-consuming darkness covers the earth. Chris commands mortals to be afraid, because this is only a small part of his power. Tana wants to know what he is capable of, but the young man finally notices that a video is being filmed. Chris tries to take the phone from her, but the president deftly dodges it, and she begins to threaten the deputy. She invites him to show a lot of interesting things recorded on her phone. Chris falls to his knees and begs her to delete everything. This offer attracts the cunning fox, and she invites him to lose. For a second, a scene flashes through her head where he turns and kisses her tenderly on the cheek. Thinking about it, she quickly stuffs the phone into her bra, thinking in her head that Chris would never think of it in his little mind. Tana invites the young man to delete the video from her phone himself if that's what he wants. Chris decides to abruptly change the subject, saying that they wanted to buy a closet, and immediately points to one of the applicants, whom she supposedly immediately noticed. But turning around, he saw how Tana decided to perch on one of the chests of drawers. Crossing her legs, she wants to know how Chris thinks this furniture is comfortable to sit on. The young man immediately understands that something is wrong. The main character tries to pretend that everything is fine, but inside himself he convinces himself that the president has always loved to sit on strange surfaces and he just needs to get used to it. Jumping off him, she decides that then they will take him, while Chris, looking at the scene, believes that the student council will not be able to afford it. Then Tana decides to simply propose cutting the literature club's budget. Chris is unhappy that the president is so angry at the literary club and believes that she should be ashamed. As a result, they took this expensive cabinet, and the student council was left without money. Naturally, they did not touch the budget of the literary club. Surprisingly, Chris suddenly felt a kind of comfort and strange thoughts appeared in his head. The young man is embarrassed to say directly, because if he starts a conversation, then he and Tana will no longer be able to be friends. But if he remains silent, he will never know peace in life, and Chris nevertheless decides to turn to the president. The hero begins to hesitate, and his face immediately begins to turn red. Tanya becomes very curious. While the deputy is trying to collect his thoughts, the girl already thought that everything had finally dawned on him. Her hands in which she holds the glass begin to shake with excitement. Chris finally blurts out that Tana never gave him the game signal fire for, but she promised him in exchange for helping him with the date. These words turned out to be completely not what she wanted to hear from him. Now her hands are shaking with anger, and she decides that she heard it, and she did not hear him. Squeezing the glass and straining her face to keep a smile on it, she asks to repeat it again, and Chris, without hesitation, starts shouting about his game again. Tana is no longer able to restrain himself, and grabs his deputy by the collar, accusing him that he is doing all this on purpose. The young man sincerely does not understand why he cannot demand what he honestly earned. The devil begins to burst out of the president, because in front of her is a brute who is playing with the feelings of a young girl. She has already boiled to the point that she wants to know what Chris thinks is the color of his blood. The young man tries to convince her that she shouldn't go so far, because killing people is not good, and people who die by other means become ghosts. Tana accepts his words and believes that she can kill him a little differently and includes a recording of him impersonating the Moon Lord as proof. Chris literally loses the ground from under his feet from his shame, and the girl does not stop nightmare him with a video recording. As a result, the hero does not hold back and grabs her hand with the phone so that at least a little of the remarks come from it. And the deputy begins to tearfully beg Tanu to delete this shameful video. After all, his life is already too complicated, but the girl decides that everything depends on his behavior. She thinks that they may not be on a date, but girls are supposed to give gifts. Chris hands her a fox stuffed animal and asks if that's what she means. He thinks that the toy is very similar to Tanu, the same white with red eyes. The last thing he added was about character, and the president clearly didn't like it, since she again showed off the phone with the video. Tana still decides to listen to what he means. Chris is trying to say that the color white symbolizes her pure heart and beautiful soul. But the most important thing is that he thinks the fox is beautiful and generally cool. This answer takes Tanu by surprise. The young man tries to come up with further advantages, but the girl has already reached out to his present. Chris notes that she looks very cute with his gift. The president is still trying to digest everything that was said. Hugging a soft toy, she says that she, of course, really liked this video, but since he asks so, she will choose a fox. If you believe the Mandarin, then the president likes the same things that he likes, which is why she is now running around so cutely and talking to the fox. This is already a big victory for him. Today he was able to defeat this white fox. Tana, drinking tea with tapioca, notes that he took the girl shopping all morning and then to a cafe. Chris looks up from her bowl of noodles and says that she said herself that she was tired and hungry. The president decides to ask the deputy if he remembers how they met. That day, Chris gave her flowers, but he didn't bring them to her, so she wants the young man to tell who they were intended for then. The hero's gaze instantly dropped and he asks for forgiveness and says that he doesn't want to talk about it. Tana apologizes to Chris, but he also has a question he would like to ask her. The girl doesn't mind, and would like to know about the consultation fee. The young man does not understand what kind of consultation we are talking about. She did not pay him anything. Then the fox offers the following scheme: if she can answer the question, she will buy him a drink, and if not, then drinks from her. Taking his leg hostage, she believes that the choice is his, while in his mind he has already called her a sly fox. Chris begins his story with the fact that when they first met, it was raining, and then he noticed a girl standing alone in the rain at a bus stop. Then he wondered what was wrong with her, since she didn't even have an umbrella. He was tormented by the thought of why she was standing there. Coming closer to her, he handed her a bouquet of daisies. He raises an umbrella over her head. He wants to know where he lives, and offers to accompany her. His story is interrupted by Tana, who decided that this was too personal a question and she wanted lemonade. All Chris can do is listen to her. He understands that she came up with such rules because she knew that he would ask about it. Putting 2 bottles of soft soda on the table, he says that these are the fruits of her unsurpassed cunning. Looking at the bottle, Tana declares that if her mother found out about what Chris was treating her to, she would break his knees. These threats greatly frighten the young man. The fox decides that so be it. She will give him a chance to win back. But the young man does not like this, since he already understands that she has some kind of insidious plan. This doesn't stop Tanya from pointing at him. She asks, he answers. The hero continues to remain silent, and the president wonders if defeat is what sets him up or if he just fell in love. Tana continues to harass the young man, but he refuses everything and asks her to leave. The girl is pressing Chris more and more, because last week he did not answer the girl's declaration of love. He immediately remembers Melinda. This plunges him into shock, but he is kept calm by the thought that Tana did not ask him about who exactly confessed to him. She wondered if this was the case in principle. He could just nod or shake his head, but Chris decides to stick to his line, saying that nothing happened. In the end, he coped with this difficult task, and Tana was the loser. After taking a sip of cola, she says that she is very sorry and invites him to try the soft drink too. Chris doesn't like that she's already taken a sip, and meanwhile Tana is reaching into her purse. Having taken out her stuffed fox, she believes that they have dealt with the matter, and since it is already quite late, it is time for her to go home. In parting, she advises him to drink cola at home, since it was awkward for her to drink here. Seeing her moving away, he also decides to quickly get away from this place. The next morning, waking up early in the morning, one thought comes to him. It seems that the demon living in him is thirsting for blood again. He really wants soup. Having risen, he understands that he needs to get up and look for food. Only now he understands how difficult it is without Molly. Hearing the doorbell, he immediately rushed towards her, thinking that his little sister had finally returned to save her brother. But it was not Molly who was waiting for him outside the door, but Melinda, fully armed with sweets from their store. Chris looks at her with a surprised look. He addresses her as Molly, saying that they haven't seen each other for just a day, and she managed to become a pink-haired demon. Melinda doesn't hold back and hits him on the nose, not understanding what he's talking about. Has he forgotten that he has to help her at work today? And she also wonders if he wants to say something about her costume. But Chris was surprised in itself by her appearance, by the fact that she simply came to his house. The girl does not hold back and gives him a small slap, calling him a fool. She kicks off her shoes and, walking into the room, says that she brought muffins for breakfast, while Chris thinks that if he loses the war on his territory for the second time, he will not be able to look at himself in the mirror. He decides to be proactive and says that his mother and sister are in the bedroom, and his father is now in the kitchen. The young man invites her to sit down while he calls everyone. The girl begins to shake with fear and asks why he didn't warn her earlier. She's worried that she only brought 2 cupcakes for Chris and his sister, but the young man tries to calm her down, saying that mom and dad won't be upset. Melinda cannot stand this and decides that she will wait for him downstairs, since she is not ready for this yet. Chris gloats in his thoughts, but the hero stops her and begins to call his parents and sister at the top of his voice. He shouts that his classmate decided to visit them and brought them cupcakes. Melinda even had tears in her eyes from excitement. Chris laughs and decides to admit that he was joking with her. Her parents are not at home, and Molly has left altogether. Melinda grins with anger and, calling him an idiot, asks him to give his hand. Taking hold of his hand more tightly, she bared her teeth and is already screaming that she is now going to bite him to death. Already at the establishment, he put on his uniform and tries to endure it while Melinda ties another knot on his apron. Chris asks her to bite his other hand next time, otherwise he's already worried about his right one. Miss Spring promises that if he behaves well, she won't bite at all. The young man notes that even though this is a joke, he is still scared. Melinda chuckles in response, but she wonders why he decided that someone was joking with him now. Her threats are interrupted by a cafe worker. She is very glad that their main maid is here. This worker turned out to be the manager of a medieval castle-themed store named Miss Liana. Melinda introduces Chris as her classmate who came to work part-time, and she allows him to use him as much as he wants, because he owes her mom money. She previously pushed Chris to greet Liana. While the main character feels like a slave, the manager says that she kept wondering where Melinda disappeared for 2 weeks, but it turns out that their baby fell in love. And she notes that their uniform suits the guys very well. They are just like a real couple. The girl blushes and dryly replies that they are just friends. Chris begins to panic. Melinda has the same face, just like the fox had yesterday, and if he again denies everything, he will again be called a scumbag and a cheater. He decides to just play dumb while Liana admires their youthful love. She decides to hug the guys and tell them that she will keep their secret so Rick's boss won't find out. The manager sends them to the kitchen and promises that he will not disturb them. But all this turned out to be for a reason. Boss Chica prepared something for them there. Liana slams the door, leaving Chris and Melinda alone with their awkwardness. In this silence, the girl decides to ask his opinion if they look good together. Chris asks her to calm down. It's just a small misunderstanding. And in general, if they came here to work, then it's time to start. And he's also interested in what Aunt Rika has prepared for them. Melinda realizes that this stale cracker is absolutely impenetrable, and glancing at the countertop, she notices the cream. Miss Spring decides to take matters into her own hands. Mischievous thoughts have closed in her head. She decides to show who the devil is here. She approaches Chris in the hope of finding out what Rika has prepared for them, but they could not even imagine what could be waiting for them there. Melinda thinks that they shouldn't be surprised and notices that Chris is looking like a ram at the new gate. The box contains a cake with an inscription that hints that a handsome guy broke a girl's heart, and Rika hopes that she can help him apologize properly. Melinda believes that there is nothing unusual in this message and gift, but the young man thinks the opposite. For Miss Spring, this is an ordinary custom-made cake. In her opinion, now she better remember that they have to work, and she orders him to change his shoes in order to go to the kitchen. As she continues to get out the baking supplies, Chris tries to accept that it's all just that. They start decorating cakes, and Melinda asks if he has tried himself as a pastry chef. The young man denies and allows them to command. This is all to her advantage. Her plan is to sneak up, throw cream in Chris's face and take a photo of him. But first, she carefully takes her lover's hands and, saying that there is nothing complicated about it, helps to even out the layer of cream on the cake. Melinda says that he needs to get ready for everything, while behind her back she holds in her hand a clot of cream, which from the room heat begins to drip onto the floor. Hugging the young man even tighter around the waist, the girl asks him not to complain if she swears a lot. Having chosen the ideal distance, she decides to begin the plan for her revenge, and, swinging as hard as she can, slaps Chris in the face. The main character stands upset and rubs his cheek, saying that he hoped that she would teach him to cook, but instead she does nonsense. To her surprise, Melinda does not see any traces of cream on his face. Meanwhile, she herself stepped into the ambush she had set with her foot. This turns out to be a fatal mistake for her and, having taken a step, she slips and, flying, grabs Chris's belt. Hearing noise and screams in the room, Miss Liana immediately hurried there. She wanted to find out if the guys needed help. But the manager only saw a picture of Melinda hanging onto Chris's pants so as not to fall and screaming at the top of her lungs so that he would not move. Seeing this, Liana quickly slammed the door behind her. The guys immediately tried to shout to her that she actually misunderstood everything. Sitting on the floor, Melinda begins to get very worried, almost to the point of hysterics. The girl starts crying and says that Chris is to blame for all this and the manager most likely thought about them wrong. Rubbing tears from her eyes, Melinda wants to know if he will try to console her, but the young man does not think that is necessary. This freed her hands to implement Plan B. Shouting that it was his own fault, she pointed a bag of cream at him. She knocks the hero to the floor while Chris tries to resist, not understanding her sudden mood swings. But Melinda is no longer listening to him and we suggest him not to move as the little devil is going to take a lot of ugly photos with him. The main character does not understand why the villain immediately lays out his entire insidious plan, and on top of everything else, he notices that the tip of the pastry bag is not cut off. This played a fatal mistake. pressing even harder on the bag, all the contents splashed in the opposite direction. Melinda didn't understand why everything wasn't going according to plan. She's a devil, why then does she always get it? But Chris decides to point out another problem to his colleague. Because of this fun, they did not notice how something began to burn in the oven. This infuriates the girl and she throws him out the door, shouting after her that she'll figure it out on her own, and in response Chris begs her not to leave him here alone. The young man no longer understands what they are doing here, whether they are working part-time and making cakes. Suddenly they called him handsome and asked if he was busy. The stranger turned out to be an attractive girl who did not remember that the young man had worked in this establishment before. Chris replied that he was only working part-time, since there was no such thing as extra money. She invites the hero to just chat, but Chris doesn't think he can do that. The girl complains that now he has nothing to do and in general, up close, he reminds her of her first love, noting that his eyes are exactly the same. The young man tries to reduce it all to a small misunderstanding and replies that it all just seems to her. But the lady cannot be stopped. She invites him to spend some time with her after work, and promises that he will have money every month. This makes Chris start to blush with embarrassment. In his head he is already trying to understand what kind of plot twist this is. This is definitely an arc about finding money. Although he rarely watches TV, this sweet girl is unlikely to be a fraud. Melinda quietly creeps up behind the hero and, seeing a charming person in front of him, she wants to know what her colleague is doing. She grabs Chris and says that Miss Liana has already searched him, and he needs to hurry so that she doesn't get angry. The young man reminds them that they have no clients at the moment, but Melinda tells him to get out of here. The girl who noticed him, seeing the object of her interest being taken away, decides to ask who is doing this, and Miss Spring, without hesitation, answers that she is Chris's girlfriend. The stranger immediately loses interest and, after saying goodbye, leaves the store. As soon as the front door slammed behind her, Melinda begins to shake the young man by the chest, asking what he was doing here, mentioning that she heard their entire conversation with that lady. Chris doesn't understand what she actually wants from him, and the girl, meanwhile, decides to remind him that if she hadn't intervened, he would have ruined his whole life. Lowering her tone a little, she begins to pat the hero on the head and declares that if he needs money, he can just ask, and she just wants to spend time together. The young man decides to explain that he actually has no financial problems. Melinda just wants him to know that she will always be happy to help him if there is any problem. Just then Chica Auntie comes into the room and hears their conversation. Chris tries to get the little devil off of her, saying that if she has so much extra money she can give it away to those in need. The girl reminds him that he just almost became a gigolo. In the midst of their verbal spat, Chica intervenes, suggesting that they all go to dinner together. Auntie squats down sweetly and, smiling, promises that she will treat everyone. Already sitting in the car, she decides to ask Chris how his first day at work was and whether he coped with the cake. The young man replies that everything went pretty well. Melinda decides to join the discussion and suggests that her mother make him a mascot, then there will be no end to rich women. Chica turns to her daughter and, calling her a pig, wants to know if she is tired, since she could not close her eyes the night before. The girl does not understand what she is talking about, because her mother could not see it, then how should she know? The aunt says that at night she decided to go drink water, and, seeing the light in her daughter's room, spied how she was choosing an outfit for that day. Melinda begins to burn with shame and tries to justify herself by saying that it was just a movie and she watched the movie all night. But Chica continues her story. She heard her daughter reasoning out loud that tomorrow her mother should drop her off at Chris's house and she needs to come up with a reason for this. The girl can't stand it anymore and threatens her mother. If she doesn't stop talking, she will jump out of the car. Having arrived at the appointed place, the aunt drops off the guys and says that they can go and take a table. Melinda does not understand what game her mother has started, what she is up to again. As soon as the car was out of her sight, Miss Spring received a message on her phone from her mother, who mentioned that on weekends it was almost impossible to find a free place and so she went home. But Chris also accidentally glanced at his girlfriend's phone and now wants to know what it is. Melinda immediately hides the phone behind her back and decides to quickly change the topic by saying that he was doing so well today, he didn't even check his phone or collect daily rewards in any game. The main character replies that he is no longer at the age to play games. In the morning he called his sisters and asked when she would return, so it is unlikely that anyone will need him now. Questions immediately popped into Milin's head. What about Ninel? What kind of couple are they if they don't even communicate? Having already sat down in the cafe, Miss Spring makes an order and has a nice chat with the local waitress. While Chris was chatting with his sister on the phone, the waitress wanted to know what it would be like, but when she saw the gift on the table, she fell silent and after a while said that they would do everything in the best possible way. The young man has already admitted that he misses his sister's cooking, and if this continues, he will become completely insignificant. But Molly notes that she feels even better this way. After all, otherwise her brother will always revolve around cunning foxes. Melinda clearly hears this conversation. Suddenly, Terry's voice appears on the phone. She greets Chris and says that his sister wants to leave them all and will return to him early. After hearing the entire dialogue, Melinda concludes that someone clearly has a cis complex. Chris thanks her for the compliment, while the girl tells him to eat more vegetables and places a plate in front of him. The young man notices that there is clearly a slight inequality on the table. On his side there are more vegetables than meat, and on his companion's side there are only meat delicacies. Crossing his arms over his chest, he notices that, for some reason, he's not at all surprised. Melinda genuinely cannot understand what is wrong and what he means. Chris decides to point out to her how picky she really is, but the girl doesn't see anything like that. After all, she herself believes that she is still growing, and her body must be well nourished. Chris looks at their difference in height, which does not go unnoticed by the girl. She has already called him stupid and is ready to rush into battle with him, baring her claws. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the waitress's voice tells them not to move. Looking ahead, they see that they are being filmed on a camera. The waitress tells the guys about their local tradition of congratulating visitors to their establishment on their birthdays. Chris wants to say that today is not his birthday, but when he notices a box with a bow on the table, he understands what the matter is. He tries to explain that they actually made a mistake, but Melinda interrupts him by stepping on his foot and says that she likes it. She gives the waitress the box of cake, saying that it is for another event, and asks her to cut it. Opening the box, Chris sees a cake that screams that this is a treat for a couple. Confetti crackers explode and Melinda announces that they have known him for almost 947 days. Seeing all this festive mood, Chris understands that she was literally counting the days, and it even becomes a little funny to him that he is such an idiot. Next, the guys decide to take a little walk. They even manage to go into the photo booth to take a couple of pictures. The young man notices that the ice cream today is much tastier than what they ate last week. Melinda is not surprised because it is the best ice cream in the universe. Remembering that they had a difficult time last week, she wants to know if he is going to say something hurtful to her now, or promise that they will be best friends. She continues to bombard him with questions, but Chris doesn't understand what she's saying. The only thing he wants to know from her is what she generally likes about him. Melinda does not understand why he decided to ask her such a shameful question. It sounds like she was waiting for her favorite book to come out, and the seller told her, "I'm sorry, I don't want to sell it to you, but I want you to praise it and tell me why it's good." But if he is so interested, then in return she wants to know that he and Ninel don't really love each other. Love is a complex topic. These feelings cannot be seen or touched, and nothing can be understood by behavior. It's like an arrow on a scale. It moves when you get closer to a person, and when the arrow is standing, it's just a friendly relationship. But if this balance is upset, then one side will prevail and friendship will become something else. It's just that some people believe that everything in the world happens for a reason. If they like something certain about each other, then the scales tip. Sometimes it happens that people come together because of some completely simple, everyday reasons, and the question arises, what does he like about this person? He is an ordinary guy. He did not save her from death. The fate of the whole world does not depend on him. He did not devote his whole life to the search for eternal truth. But this is how love works. Not only the saviors of the world and princesses fall in love, the simplest love is the fruit of our daily life. The sum of these little things is what they do every day. Considering all that has been said, Melinda wonders what she noticed. Maybe he seemed handsome to her, maybe his stupid smile when he crashed into something played a role. If you think about it like that, she won't even remember how it all started. But be that as it may, nothing can be done. She has already fallen in love with him. She still wants to know, she and Ninel don't love each other, is this true? Chris does not understand what she means, and Melinda begins to say that at first she was angry not even because he rejected her. Even before the confession, she thought about it a lot. They are friends, and so it would be, but she believes that they cannot be friends forever. And it's becoming more and more difficult to tell her about this, because everyone convinced her that there was no need to rush into confession, but she didn't think so, and decided that she would be at a greater advantage if he accepted her, but if not, then it's okay. The girl revolved around him so often that all her potential competitors had long fled. And until he completely hates her, she will think that there is a chance. Chris notices that she does not believe that he still has a girlfriend. Melinda strokes his cheek and asks if he is taking her for a fool. Does he really seriously think that she will believe that he fell in love literally 2 days after they met, and besides, they didn't correspond all day? Is this how lovers behave? Chris quickly turns away from her, saying that someone else's soul is dark, and she cannot deny that she and Ninel are already together. Melinda hugs him from behind a little and decides to find out what will happen if she finds out that he is lying to her. He asks her to calm down already. She agrees, but warns that if something happens to them, she should not complain later. The girl decides to ask one more question. She wants to know if Chris will hate her, to which the young man replies that he has no reason to do that. At this point she says goodbye and says that they will see each other at school. As soon as she disappeared from sight, a feeling of anger came over the young man, from not understanding how the devil understood everything. But he was saved from these disturbing thoughts by a call from his sister, who asked him to come to her. Molly loved to broadcast on the social network how she spends her time, and today was no exception. She announces that today they are at the hot springs and asks her brother in the background to say hi. Chris awkwardly greets the audience, and Terry hurried to join them, who also loved to appear on air with her best friend. The girl plopped down into the spring right between her brother and sister, starting to splash them with water. Terry began to enjoy the hot water while Molly scolded her and told her that the broadcast was on. Chris decides to ask his sister why she decided to broadcast in the first place. Molly says that while she was visiting her brother at college last week, she met someone. She noticed how her sister was chasing her brother and trying to get him to appear in her broadcast, and he ran away and told him not to show anything to anyone. The girl thought it was interesting and would cheer her up. Chris realizes that he has already heard this somewhere. The brother asks if something has happened to her that requires lifting her spirits, and Molly says that they recently confessed to her again. Chris immediately turns his furious gaze to Terry, knowing that she could, in theory, confess to her. The girl immediately notices this look and immediately begins to deny that it was not she who did it. The main character decides to find out, just in case, whether she refused and, having received an affirmative answer, praises his sister. After interrupting the broadcast, Molly gathers her strength and decides to ask Chris if he likes anyone. For a second, tension hung in the air, and, looking away, the brother answers her that he doesn't like anyone and why did she even think that? Molly replies that lately it seems to her that her brother is somehow strange, he even began to stay late at school more often. Chris decides to calm her down, saying that it just seems to her, now there is a lot of business in the student council and the disciplinary committee takes this very seriously. While he was saying this, Terry told him to step aside. Moving away from Molly, the girl begins to scold him, saying that he should take more care of his health, and that he can't even imagine how worried she is about him. The young man begins to object, shouting that he is completely healthy and he is completely fine. Terry is a little embarrassed and asks again if this is true, since she was sure that he was sick. Chris orders her to stop fooling him and asks her to explain what she means. The girl decides to tell everything. Lately she noticed that Molly was behaving strangely. She was late for school a couple of times and always runs away after class. She couldn't invite her to play on the weekend, so she thought that Chris was sick and she was talking about him cares. Terry presses the young man to the wall and tearfully begins to ask him to take care of his health so that she does not limit herself. She leaves and Chris realizes that something clearly happened to Molly. Suddenly, a painfully familiar smell reaches his nose, and he turns around to see Melinda, who is negotiating with the source manager about the delivery of their cakes. And then she also decides to turn her head and can't believe her eyes. Chris is standing in front of her. She accelerates to jump and shouts that it is fate that flies into the arms of her chosen one. But the young man stretched his hand forward in advance to stop this pink beast. But even this does not stop Melinda from starting to look from all sides, literally bringing the guy to a nervous cry. She did not find any hickeys on his body and, after conducting an analysis, she realized that his swimming trunks were definitely not to Ninel's taste. Having hugged him in a friendly manner, she admits that she thought to catch him in the act. The young man points out that this is impolite. Chris's calmness is swept away as soon as he hears the voices of his sister and Terry nearby. He has only the worst possible outcomes in his head if Molly sees them with Melinda. He had little time to think, and he grabs the girl by the hand and quickly drags her along. He decides that they will hide in one of the saunas, and quickly running there, Chris automatically presses Melinda to him and covers her mouth with his hand. Only after a couple of minutes do they both realize what situation they are in and the girl points out that it is too hot inside. Outside, the girls continue to search for Chris. Terry is convinced that she saw him somewhere nearby. That same evening, without wasting any time, the president engages in his physical training. Having finished, she notices that her phone received a notification about Molly's broadcast. The title included Hot Springs with a Brother. This information was useful to Tanya. While the girls continued their search, Chris decided to finally call Molly. He decides to tell his sister that he went to the toilet and when he returned he did not find them there, so they must return to their original place. These words calm Molly. It's as if a stone had been lifted from her soul. Realizing that they could return, Chris was happy, but not for long, since, apparently, Melinda passed out from this stuffiness. Holding the fragile body of his girlfriend in his arms, the thought flashes through his head about how much trouble she is. Having nothing to do, the young man decides to put his companion on his back in order to quickly get out into the fresh air. Already outside, he decides to put Melinda on a lounge chair, pretending that she is just a visitor of historians who has fallen asleep. He himself decides to swim in the spring so as not to attract attention, but he stumbles upon a paper boat. But the boat was not the only thing that attracted his attention. He heard a familiar voice and, turning around, saw a white fox. Out of the corner of his eye he saw that Terry and Molly had finally arrived at the source, but with Tanya he couldn't stay here for long and so he was trying to sneak away quietly. But the girls notice him and want to know where he's going. The young man, unable to think of anything better, decides to say again that he urgently needs to go to the toilet. Having run far enough, Tana was already waiting for him. The hero wants to know what she needs from him, but the girl claims that she only wanted to say hello. Since she didn't demand anything more, Chris was about to leave, but the president grabbed his hand. The problem turned out to be that her towel does not hold on at all, and she asks the young man for help, otherwise there is a possibility that it will completely fall off. The sly fox invites him to hold the towel for her, but Chris decides not to fall for her tricks and sends her to the reception to ask for a clamp. He understands that if Molly saw this, the world that he so desperately protects would be instantly destroyed. As soon as Chris decided to leave, he heard the sound of a falling towel. He could not resist and turned around for a second. He immediately gets a slap on the back of his head from Tana, asking where he is looking. She is flattered that he could not restrain himself and still turned to look at her. Chris grabs a towel and throws it over her and shouts for Tana to cover herself. The girl believes that if he wants to watch, then she doesn't care about others. All this awkwardness that Chris is experiencing is also covered with fear, since he hears that his sister has already gone out to look for him. The hero again frantically begins to look around in an attempt to find shelter. Tana is surprisingly in high spirits. She sarcastically suggests calling his little sister here. There is no time left to think and Chris decides to take a desperate step. Grabbing Tana by the hand, he jumps into the source with her. Having plunged under the water, they slowly try to open their eyes, and Chris, out of habit, closes his companion's mouth. At the same time, the sister approached the water, where bubbles were bubbling on the surface. Melinda had also already woken up and was sulking with anger that Chris had abandoned her here. She would never forgive him for this. Her angry cries of retribution were heard by a girl with a camera sitting by the water. She turned out to be Ninal. Tanya clearly doesn't like the fact that Chris is holding her against her will, and she herself decides to use a trick, wrapping her legs around his body around the waist. Unable to withstand such pressure, the young man gives up and lets the president go. And she is also trying to hint to him that it is hard for her and the oxygen will soon run out, so she wants to borrow some air from him and has already begun to reach for his lips. But suddenly someone's hand plunges into the water, clinging to Chris's shoulder with a death grip. Tana also grabs onto him, and to their surprise, they are pulled out of the water by Ninal, who wants to know how the young man ended up here. The president decides to enter into a conversation and point out that her parents are the owners of this establishment, so she, as the owner, decided to give her deputy a short tour. She takes Chris by the hand and tries to lead him away to show how much else there is here, but Ninal also grabs the young man's hand. The girl gets up and decides to remind the president that Chris Brown is her boyfriend. Therefore, she will simply accompany them on the excursion, and, of course, she apologizes for the inconvenience. And Ninal also wants to talk to Chris about something, and wants to know if Tana is okay. The president quickly removes his hand and says that of course she doesn't mind. She says that she will leave them for a minute and will wait at the agreed place. Tana tried her best not to show her anger, but everything was literally burning in her soul. She did not understand why they came across Ninal. Suddenly, on the way, a bush ran next to her. The girl was surprised at this sight. It turned out to be Melinda, who used the art of camouflage in order to follow Chris. Having realized what her rival was up to, Tanya surprisingly thought it was a cool idea. Having settled down on the sun loungers, Chris wants to know if Ninal saw his sister, but the only thing the girl saw was how the two dived under the water, and then she realized that most likely the young man needed help. Ninal also decides to ask the guy if he knows where he can laminate paper. The deputy suggests visiting stores on campus that offer a similar service. Chris stops listening to his companion, as he increasingly notices how a bush of plants is approaching them. The girl continues to talk about the problems of the literary club and lamination, while the hero decides to find out what Melinda is doing here. The answer turned out to be extremely simple. Miss Spring indicated with a sign that she was watching him. Ninal shouts at him, he pulls back and invites her to go to those stores they were talking about, and also remembers that he needs to find his sister. They are already getting up to leave, but the gorilla in the bushes has other plans and Melinda grabs Chris by the leg. At this not entirely appropriate time, Tana decides to approach the guys, pointing out that they have been chatting for quite a long time, and she wanted to offer them a drink. But from what she saw, her tray with a glass flies down, as she sees that Melinda grabbed Chris by the leg and he is in flight, threatening Ninal's balance. The The young man's thoughts at that moment were only about where they all came from here and that his nightmare had returned again. Literally in the last seconds from a collision with Ninal's chest, Tana and Melinda saved him, using all their strength to keep the young man away from the charms of his rival. The girls start pulling Chris in different directions, yelling at him not to look at others. This whole, at first glance, funny picture instantly turns into a horror movie, as soon as Molly, watching what is happening in her quiet voice, calls for her brother. All four freeze with fear, and the Holy Spirit literally comes out of Chris and the young man is ready to faint. The guys decide to save at least a couple more minutes for their lives and jump into the source to hide from the wrath of their angry sister. Already sitting at home, Chris realizes that something is clearly wrong here. He remembered that on the day when his sister found him surrounded by girls, when Chris surfaced, she simply extended her hand to him with a smile. She didn't even bare her teeth at her rivals, but simply silently smiled and carried her brother away from them. And from that very day, his sister became surprisingly very sweet and gentle. One morning, Chris decides to ask her a question. He wants to know if she herself thinks that she is behaving somehow strangely. She understands that he is talking about that incident last time week, and she says that she already thinks her brother is pathetic and now she's even glad that he has friends. The brother wants to know if she's really not angry with him. The little sister pretends that she doesn't even understand what he's talking about. She says that time is running out and quickly sends Chris out the door, reminding him that he has time to go to school. Leaving home, seeing the happy expression on my sister's face, I still felt some discomfort in my soul. Walking down the street, he remembers that before leaving she told him that she would go for a walk with Terry, but her friend said that Molly began to walk alone. While he was pushing thoughts about this into the background so that he could sort them out later, he reached Ninal, who was waiting for him in the park. The girl also noticed the young man and, looking up from her book, stood up to greet him. Chris literally can't take his eyes off how lovely the girl is. While walking, the hero wants to know why his companion is so dressed up today. It turns out that the guys from the Chinese costume club asked her to pose as soon as she was free, but she didn't know how long they would be shopping, so she changed her clothes in advance. The young man rubs the back of his head and says that at first he mistook her for one of the celebrities. Ninal is very pleased to hear such words from him, which makes Chris even more embarrassed. The deputy had already plotted the route to the store they needed, but still decided to make sure by looking at the map on his phone. He was about to cross the road, when suddenly something slowed him down. It turned out to be Ninal, who didn't want him to get hit by a car, so she grabbed him by the jacket. From this commotion, Chris turned sharply back and found himself face to face with his companion. But awkwardness won out and the guys immediately moved away from each other. Ninal pointed out that the red light had turned on, and Chris apologized to her. Already in the store, bidding begins on how many copies need to be made and at what price. The seller explains that they are very busy in the coming days, and if they need it very urgently, it will cost 2,700 yuan. After all, this is business. If he takes even a little less from her, he won't even get back the materials. Ninal listened to him and, answering that she did not expect such a price, said goodbye and left the store. Already on the street, she tells everything to Chris, and the young man volunteers to try to bring down the price. The girl doesn't really believe in his success. He pushes his bangs back and assures her that she's jumping to conclusions and hasn't seen him in action yet. Entering the store, the hero says that he will need 120 sheets of double-sided printing, and he wants to know how much it will cost. Without really looking up from his business, the seller gives him a price of 2,160 yuan, warning him that they are currently busy and this price is final. Chris grins. Does the seller really think that he will fall into such a simple trap? The young man goes on the attack. He accuses the seller of going too far. Since their paper is not that high quality, the price for it at the university is 30% lower. The young entrepreneur goes all in and declares that if they do the whole job for him here for 95% of the university price, he will take 30 more copies. In addition, he will come again every month, 150 copies, if the seller gives him a discount of 40% of the amount. Chris also voices a proposal for the development of the store, that discounts and promotions are needed, like in other stores, and if the seller agrees, he will come every month. Ninal watches their negotiations, and cannot believe her ears when the seller eventually agrees to the young man's offer. Suddenly, someone shouts out to the girl and wants to know what she is doing around the corner. It turns out to be an acquaintance, Ninal, who immediately starts pinching the girl's cheeks. The girl notes that they haven't seen each other for ages, and she misses her very much. Ninal hasn't even called her since she entered medical school. Chris also noticed his new acquaintance. Behind him suddenly a gentle female voice was heard, which told him not to worry about Stacy, because she always behaves like this. She recognizes people by touch. This information was told to him by a graduate student of the Faculty of Oriental Arts named Simone Roche. She also added that her friend's way of sniffing each other was similar to that of dogs. This information made Chris even more tense. And that extravagant lady who can't hug Ninel now is Stacy Crumb. She's a medical student and a former member of the literary club. Simone says that, to tell the truth, she and Ninel are very close. She even became the president of the literary club, because they insisted on it. She herself did not want to. Stacy, meanwhile, released her friend from the hug and was already rushing towards Chris, calling him baby, shouting that when they studied together, she was shy, but now since he is one of them, she is eager to touch him. But Ninel stops her, reminding her not to play around in the exhibition hall. The girl doesn't understand why her friend is so cold towards her, and assumes that little Ninel doesn't like it when she touches other people. The heroine only repeats that they are now at a painting exhibition and they need to behave with dignity. Seeing that the situation has become a little tense, Simone decides to invite Chris to go away and talk in private. Having learned about the incident in the store, the girl was surprised, because knowing Ninel, she herself would not have asked for help, so this is a rare case. Simone wants to know what Chris thinks about her friend from the book club. The young man doesn't really know how he should answer this question, since they don't know each other well, and their relationship is not real. But he feels that he is so calm next to her. Sometimes she may seem cold, but in reality she is very sensitive. In general, she is his fake girlfriend, but not entirely. He still decides to say out loud that Ninel is a wonderful person, but Simone clearly wants more specifics from him. Then her today's incomparable image immediately came to his mind, and he admits that she looks like a fairy. The friend admits that Ninel hardly smiles and seems indifferent, but this is just a mask. Simone nudges him in a friendly way and says that everything will become clear to him when they get closer. She admits that this is the first time she's seen a friend with a guy, and we suggest that if something happens, they turn to her for help. The friend strokes Chris's head and says that Ninel trusts him. The young man finally returns to his companion and declares that he will need her help. The girl immediately understands that the conversation will most likely be about Melinda. He hadn't even had time to thank her for her help that time at the hot springs. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, Ninel decides to ask him to tell him what it is like to love. And she wonders what feelings are all about. Chris was a little taken aback by his questions, but this was to be expected from her. At first the question seemed strange to him, but it made sense. Probably the girl was really interested. He decides to answer. Feelings are most likely a kind of empathy that arises in the heart when interacting with something. If the feelings are positive, then the person is happy, and if negative, then he is sad and upset. Ninel concluded that feelings can only manifest themselves superficially. Chris begins to object, but cannot really explain why this is not entirely true. The young man thinks that this is most likely just the most obvious way. Ninel continues to think about the words he said. A sweet expression appears on the girl's face, and the guy cannot contain the volcano inside him. Looking at her with these emotions, he breaks into a smile. Unexpectedly, Ninel apologizes to him. She just thought that she should have a cute expression on her face, because he helped her, and they pretend to be a couple, but she doubts that she did it well. Chris thinks in his mind that she doesn't even know how cute that was. They continue their walk, talking about further plans for the day, and during all this they did not notice how Molly, standing nearby, drew attention to them. In the end, they say goodbye and go home, but there was enough time for Chris's sister to understand who her target is. A few hours later, the young man's phone rang, and when he picked it up, he heard his worried mother, who began talking about an important matter and asking him to help her. By that time, the girl was already actively participating in the photo shoot and diligently posing for the camera. From the moment the young people separated, Molly continued to spy on her rival. At the same time, Chris was already on his way, at his mother's request, to his uncle, who urgently needed help. Everyone in the subway car was not happy with this young man, as he was carrying a durian with him, which began to smell fragrant with its sickening aroma throughout the entire carriage. It takes forever to get to his relative, almost through the entire city. He himself is still in shock. It turned out that a few days ago Molly wanted durian, but it was too expensive, so she decided to send them a couple. And when my mother told her sister that she would send the durian, she asked him to send it to his uncle to share. In the message the mother asked Chris not to complain, which the young man was a little dissatisfied with. He decides to tell Molly about this whole situation and, by dialing the number, wants to find out where she is now. The girl quickly tells him that she is now at the market and wants to ask him what to buy for dinner. This raises questions for the main character, because classes had just ended, then how could she have time to run to the market? He decides to find out where exactly she is in order to come and help her. Molly says backhandedly that they had a test, so they were released early, and now her hands are full and she cannot speak. The girl says that she will return home dinner and hangs up. Chris immediately saw through this lie. Judging by the sounds in the background, she was not at the market, no one was trading without inviting buyers. And suddenly it dawns on him. Terry said that Molly was late for school and then left early. At first he thought it was all just a coincidence, but now he doesn't think so. She must be hiding something. When he walked from his uncle, having picked up the durians, he heard advertising music of one confectionery playing in the background. There are only 2 such confectionaries in the area. His sister was probably in the one closer to the school, but after his call she must have gotten scared and went to another. It turns out that if he thought through everything correctly, then she should be there. And actually approaching the establishment, he sees Molly behind the counter. But his little sister is not alone there. Slightly increasing his viewing angle, he sees that Molly is sitting at the counter with Ninel. He hears his sister telling his friend to continue where they left off. Trying to make her voice as stern as possible, Molly orders Ninel to leave her brother behind. But the girl doesn't understand why she should do this. Molly answers with a little timidity that Chris told her that he doesn't like anyone. Therefore, she wants to convey to Ninel that this means that he does not love her. She adds that she doesn't know whether her rival wants to take advantage of him or blackmail him, but she asks her to break up with him immediately. Her brother doesn't care about anything like that. Chris, pouring himself cold, then looks at this spectacle, afraid to come closer, while Ninel calmly shakes his head negatively at her requests. Then Molly decides to take a more radical approach and, putting a bank card on the table, offers her rival 100,000 yuan. She says that the password is Chris's date of birth and if she needs money, she can take it. The brother does not understand where she got so much money, but he realizes that things are taking a dangerous turn. At some point, Ninel turns his head and sees Chris, who nevertheless dared and headed in their direction. Noticing where her interlocutor's gaze was looking, Molly followed it and, to her horror, met her brother's eyes. Grabbing a card from the table, she tries to get out of here as quickly as possible. Ninel takes him by the hand and drags the confused Chris along. Rushing down the street, the young man realized that now he regretted not telling Molly about his fake relationship with Ninel. Now he understands why she behaved so strangely. Apparently she found out that he had someone, but now the most important thing is to understand where she ran away. And in this regard he has one option. His intuition did not let him down, and he discovered his sister swinging on a swing. Chris sits down on a nearby swing and claims that if his sister does not prepare him something to eat, he will die of hunger. Molly tries to leave again, but her brother decides to give an ultimatum. If she runs away now, he will not talk to her. The sister returns to the swing and, starting to rummage through the briefcase, at the same time wants to know how he found her. The girl takes a bun out of her briefcase and tries to quickly stuff it into her brother's mouth while he wants to talk to her. But she doesn't let him get a word in, and puts a bottle of soda in Chris's mouth so that he washes down the bun. The young man still tries to start a conversation by saying that he has long wanted to discuss a topic with her. Molly takes out an apple and tries to tell him that he doesn't eat enough fruit and needs to take care of his health. She looks at her brother with full eyes of hope. The girl asks not to hate her. Chris exhales deeply and says that he is her big brother and will never forgive her for this. Out of fear, Molly's apple falls from her hands. She begins to sob and wants to justify herself to Chris. She didn't expect anything like this to happen. Since that day she watched him every morning. Molly even dug into his college database to find the girl he was going out with. She wanted to pay her to dump Chris. She's crying now because she knew it would end like this, but the girl couldn't help herself. Approaching his sister, Chris declares that he will never forgive her for wanting to eat durians without his permission. After all, watermelons are cheaper and there are a lot of them in summer. Then why eat other fruits if you have watermelons, and durians are too expensive? The sister can't believe her ears, but the brother just wanted to talk about something else. But her brother interrupts her and, stroking her head, says that, even though she is good at school, her brother understands much more in life. He sits down and finally tells Molly that he and Ninel are actually just friends. He went on to tell the sisters in full about their secret agreement with his fake girlfriend. Molly asked why he would spend time with Ninel if they could limit themselves to simple photos. Chris also had to talk about Melinda, who confessed her love to him. And in the end, Molly finally asked what worried her most. The question was how much longer they would pretend with that girl. Her brother cannot promise anything to this, because he has no idea about this. Melinda will not just give up, so he cannot break up with Ninel. The little sister admits that her brother turns out to be quite popular and now she has to think about what to do about it. Chris understands that Molly will soon enter high school, but for now she is acting like a spoiled child. But he understands that for him she will always be his beloved little sister. This is how one of his problems was solved. Of course, he would like to continue to live in peace, but there is always some but. Suddenly, he was woken up in class by 2 of his friends, who shouted that something terrible had happened. They begin to blame the young man. Allegedly because of him the student council unexpectedly attacked them and the Mandarin woman cut their hair. And now the guys say that his life depends on the choice of Milind or Tan, who he likes more. Nothing can be done, and Chris has to go to the office, where the girls are already waiting for him. To everyone's surprise, the teacher turns to him as the headman and says that this year they have opened culinary courses, and since they do not have free classes, they decided to divide his class into 2 groups. Chris finally exhales, because he knew that those two were simply exaggerating. He decides to suggest that the teachers simply divide the class into two halves according to the list. But then disturbing thoughts begin to occur to him, that now his decision may be rash. He almost forgot about the trap. He must choose which side he will suffer on. Seeing the president's creepy look, he realizes that she is probably up to something. And Melinda also scared him, but it would definitely be safer with her than with the fox. Chris decides to interrupt the teacher to wait a minute while the prefect asks the class how they feel about the idea. But then Tana comes into the conversation. She doesn't think that this is a good idea, but Chris's proposal to divide the class into two groups and mix with their students is quite logical. The only thing is that they might feel out of place. Tana wants to know what the prefect thinks about this, but Chris thinks that they have already studied together for one semester, so does she really think that people are that vulnerable? The teacher has already agreed with the arguments of the student council president, but the hero intervenes in the conversation and shouts that everything is wrong. The guys from his class will die of joy if they find out that they will study with one of these girls in the same class. The teacher asks if the guys have any other suggestions. At this moment, Tana decides to join in and another idea popped into her head. As a result, thanks to the insidiousness and cunning of the president, all three classes were simply mixed, taking into account their assigned places. They were all just randomly scattered, and now they began handing out aprons to everyone who decided to attend the cooking classes. The teacher announces that they will soon begin work, but for now asks everyone to split into groups of 3. The noise and commotion begins. Many want to get into groups with the beauties Melinda and Tana. The partners quickly want to shift their responsibilities to Chris in order to supposedly calm down the students. The young man says that they have finally become insolent and tries to find out what they are up to. Bob replies that he is too kind not to help Miss Melinda, because she is clearly uncomfortable in this crowd. And Dash is already preening his hair, saying that Tana is clearly in trouble and if he doesn't help her now, then he won't be able to sleep a wink at night. Chris grabs them by the collar and says that they are already superfluous in this crowd. The guys immediately begin to cry about how they lack female attention, but he does not understand this, since he himself has a beautiful girlfriend. The main character orders them to stop talking nonsense and announces that today they will be in a group with him. The guys start yelling even more. In the midst of this debate, Tana approaches them to find out if the three have formed a group. The guys start shouting out loud that they are still free, while Chris stands behind and is perplexed. The girl admits that everything is a little complicated for her there, and she asks to join them. Then Melinda appears on the horizon, who came to them with exactly the same request. Bob falls to the floor, but there is no need to worry about him, as he feels that a holiday has come to his street. The teacher notices this commotion and says that there are only 5 of them left, but their tables are too small for them to work in a group of 5. Therefore, she decides to find out which of the guys knows how to cook. Bob jumps up from the floor and says that he has already become the youngest chef in the history of the family. Chris understands that the young man is blatantly lying. Next, Dash blurts out that he is capable of opening new horizons in cooking. He is ready to take any delicacy to a new level. This information was also not true. Chris, shyly, admits to the teacher that he knows how to cook a little, but this only plays into the hands of the teacher, because now she has made the right decision. If Bob and Dash can cook so well, then in all likelihood they should be able to do it together. And she announces that the second group is Tanu, Chris, and Melinda. This is the worst outcome that the main character could end up in. Miss Spring immediately rushed to buy groceries in joy, while Chris tries to find out whether this was the president's final plan, but she pretends that she does not understand what he is talking about. At the same time, Dash and Bob approached Chris from behind. They threatened that they would watch his every step and every glance. On top of everything else, Dash asks the headman to tell him about what Tana really is like. She's always so sweet, charming, and sophisticated. Suppressing a nervous laugh, Chris agrees, but inside he knows that the president is treacherous, cruel, and lazy. Thinking about this, he turned around and saw Tana's simply hellish gaze, which sent shivers down his spine. Then he begins to say out loud, nervously, that she is truly the most sophisticated, gentle, and real goddess in the flesh. Bob also decides to find out about the object of his love dreams. Melinda, as sweet as she looks from the outside, wants to know. Chris's nerves begin to give way. He rejected this girl, and she dared to approach Ninel. Melinda grabs a butcher's hatchet, which plunges the hero into horror. Is it possible that his every conversation is being overheard? The guys noticed his gaze and want to know where their headman is staring so much. Fortunately for him, Tana intervenes, noting that he has been chatting with the guys for 10 minutes and making the girls wait. While the guys are still fighting, the president pours himself a drink. This attracts Melinda's attention and she becomes very interested. She decides to ask her partner what kind of drink she is drinking and Tana answers that it is a new flavor of cola, which was invented by Chris Brown's father. The president admits that she wanted to cook chicken wings in cola, so she took the bottle, but there wasn't much left. While her rival is surprised by everything, Tana realizes that the tangerine may have told her about her. The girl invites Melinda to try the drink, pointing to the last glass which she clenched between her teeth. Miss Spring is delighted and thanks her colleague for such generosity. She carefully takes the opposite edge with her lips and tilts it slightly towards herself. Only now Tana surprisingly begins to experience very strong excitement. Her heart is ready to jump out of her chest. Chris notices all this and decides to ask what the girls are doing there. The ladies immediately take a step away from each other. Tana replies that they were just drinking cola, and Melinda begins to blame him for the fact that the young man is not helping them. While cutting onions, Miss Spring wants to ask the guys, if they are on the student council together, how often they cook for each other. The president wants to know why she is so interested in this. Chris in the background is just starting to melt the tension from this. Melinda decided to ask this just like that, because they don't communicate often. The vixen decides to have fun, so she approaches Chris and tries to feel his butt. The deputy becomes blacker than a cloud. He wonders why they are discussing him. It would be better if they were talking about games or at least about life. Chris decides to stop all this gossip and talk by saying that he is finally starting to cook. Melinda decides to say that even though he is lazy a lot, the young man helps the student council a lot. She doesn't know what they would do without him. Chris doesn't like that he was called lazy. The girls admit that he is quite good. This scares the guy, since their thoughts have already begun to coincide. They seem to finally have it all figured out, and now Chris announces that it's time to add seasoning. But it still can't be so smooth, so Tana decides to say that it seems that her deputy is popular with the girls. She also decides to add, although everyone already knows, that Chris is dating Ninal. The president wants to know from Melinda what she thinks about this. The girl begins to mumble something inaudibly while Chris tries to pretend that he doesn't exist here. But in the end, Miss Spring calmly replies that she sees nothing wrong with this. The main thing is that the young people love each other. Tana confirms her words and adds that, of course, it would be a shame if it were revealed that Chris liked someone else. She suggests that these girls should probably give up, and Tana wants to know Melinda's opinion on this matter. But the girl suddenly forgot all existing words in her excitement, and the knife fell out of her shaking hands. Gathering her will into a fist, she laughs and admits that she doesn't even know what's the best thing to do here. Relationships are complicated things. The main thing is to sort out your feelings. Seeing the reactions of others, Tana realizes that the tangerine was right, and Chris himself does not understand anything, so she plans to continue flirting with him. Melinda suddenly jumps up and, clinging to the president, wants to know whether Chris walking with a girl on the college campus is not prohibited by the rules. She is even ready to provide all the necessary evidence. She will happily become their special agent. Tana pats her on the head and with a smile believes that there is no point in interfering in this. As an example, she cites the previous president and deputy of the student council, who met while studying at school. Melinda is upset at her rejected initiative, while Chris thinks everything is fine. The teacher decides to remind the students to stay focused on their assignments and warns them that if they fail, they will have to cook at home and then mail the photos to her. On Chris's team, the girls decide to do a photo shoot for his dish. Chris steals their plate and asks why they are taking pictures of his food, while wondering what they cooked during this time. Melinda pushes her plate towards him, saying that this is a special dish that she prepared especially for him. But as soon as she decided to take a bite, she realized that she had gone a little overboard with the spices and it was too spicy. Sighing, Chris notices that the president has suddenly disappeared somewhere. Turning around, he saw a white tail sticking out behind the tabletop. He wonders if she really doesn't intend to do anything and just plans to take a photo of the dish. The girl jumps out from the table, realizing that they were talking about her. She strokes the deputy's cheek, admitting that she simply doesn't know how to cook, but she has already come up with something and asks the young man not to peek. Chris feels someone take his hand and looks down to see Melinda trying to push him food. The young man tries to find out what she's up to, and Miss Spring admits that she wants him to stand still and not move. She didn't take her chopsticks, and she's too lazy to wash her hands. It finally dawns on the main character that she wants him to feed her, but he asks if she is sure of this, since there is a crowd of guys around them now. Melinda answers with consent. She obediently opens her mouth and closes her eyes, but after 30 seconds she realizes that for some reason they are not feeding her food and, opening her eyes, she saw Chris greedily stuffing his mouth with goodies. In a fit of rage, she is already flying at him, ready to fight with him for food. But the young man decides to play it safe and puts a tasty treat in her mouth. The girl's face immediately breaks into a smile. But along with the treat, she also grabbed Chris's finger, and now she doesn't want to let him go. The young man's finger was saved, as someone's hands grabbed Melinda's cheeks, and a voice familiar to her said that she now understood why she refused to be with them in the group. This acquaintance turns out to be Melinda's bad friend named Steven. He claims that she exchanged their group for her boyfriend. The girl decides to send her friend far away so as not to cause Chris even more embarrassment. Meanwhile, there is a deafening noise in the kitchen. Tana is clearly trying to cook something. In the end, she even succeeded, and she presented Chris with her culinary creation, called a dragon egg. She claims that this is molecular cuisine. The president invites the deputy to try her dish. Tana reminds them that the last time they played with food didn't end well, and after saying that, she puts half an egg in her mouth. The next step is to push Chris against the countertop and assume that if she feeds him mouth to mouth, he won't resist. But the young man begins to resist and beg her not to do this to him. A couple of minutes later, she finally retreated and began to gobble up what the deputy had prepared. The president notes that Chris is a pretty good cook, and she didn't even know about it. Tana offers him the position of a personal chef, and sign a contract for 70, 80 years, and they will discuss the salary later. Chris begins to swear at her for seeming to choose her own slave. At that time Ninal walked past along the corridor and heard this familiar voice. Looking through the window in the door, she saw that silence and calm reigned inside the classroom. Tana decides to ask Chris when they met Melinda, noticing from the outside that they get along well. The young man admits that they met a couple of years ago. Her next question was, and when he met that girl? The hero didn't even understand the question at first and asked which girl. Tana reminds us that we are talking about his girlfriend named Ninal. The young man almost had a heart attack, he almost forgot about her. Chris timidly admits that they met a couple of weeks ago. His confessions lead the fox to some interesting thoughts. She admits that she thought so. The hero is interested in what she means. The president lies down on the tabletop and coquettishly says that she simply doesn't know what to do in order to manage everything. In his excitement, Chris drops his butcher's hatchet and cuts his finger. He begins to scream in pain. Tana calls him a fool and immediately reaches into his pocket to get something. Wiping the blood with a handkerchief, she invites him to visit her on Saturday. The hero is not even given time to think and take a break. The girl puts his wounded finger in her mouth. Tana says that this is all because of the Mandarin. She wants to see the deputy. Chris realizes that he is unable to resist such a polite invitation, and he agrees to visit her on Saturday. But in the evening, returning home, he had no idea what was waiting for him at home. He opens the door and shouts to his sister that he is back, but finds Molly in a menacing mood. The young man freezes in the doorway with fear while his little sister comes up to him and carefully takes him by the tie. But with a sharp jerk she wraps it around your hand and looks intently at Chris. Having tripped him, the young man instantly finds himself on the floor. He tries to find out from her what she is doing and why she is so angry. Molly looks at him with a cold gaze and points to his finger, which turns out to be wrapped in a pink handkerchief. She threatens him with a rolled-up newspaper and wants to know if they did it. Chris immediately says that there was nothing between them. They are not a real couple and are just pretending. The sister starts screaming that she already understood everything in the morning when he ran off to get groceries. So she believed that he was not in a relationship. It turns out that he cooked for her, but they agreed that her brother would cook only for her. Chris gently begins to stroke her, calmly explaining that he had a home economics class in college and he got cooking. Molly calms down a little, and once again wants to know if he definitely didn't cook for another woman. Chris answers in the affirmative, and as a conciliatory gesture, he volunteers to cook dinner for them himself. Standing at the stove, the young man thinks about the fact that Molly is still such a child. It's not at all easy with her. But his sister was not inferior to him in genius. Since she was too lazy to cook, she decided to make a scene and eventually achieved her goal. While carrying food to Molly, Chris notices that he received a message from Ninal on his phone. The girl apologizes for disturbing him so late. She wants him to tell her when Tana will have free time during the week, since she wants to talk to her. The next day, Chris rushed to class headlong to quickly see Ninal. He is interested in finding out why she wants to meet with the president, but the girl first invites him to sit down. Ninal asks if he remembers when she invited him to the literary club. The deputy wanted to answer her question, but sitting down next to him, the watch on his hand went off, and Molly's voice came from it, saying that she was measuring the distance and ordering her brother to immediately move 20 centimeters away from the fake girl. She continues to shout that any physical contact is prohibited, but Chris covers the speaker with his hand and, apologizing to Ninal, says that Molly is still a little child. The girl admits that she thought that Chris would not be able to join the literary club, assuming that the student council would not let him go, so if he does not mind, then on Friday she plans to talk to Tana. The young man understands that he himself would never be able to approach Tanya and say that he is leaving for another club, and she would most likely think that he was just joking, so it would be better if Ninal did this. Apparently yesterday she didn't dare tell him her plan, because the decision seemed too hasty to her. Considering what Simone had said about her then, he wondered what the other side of Ninal was. Having met in the hall, the girl says that sometimes it seems to her that her friend is glowing in real life. Of course, Chris didn't notice the glow behind her, but he saw that she was an observant and good person. Simone is ready to argue with him that at first he considered Ninal cold and insensitive, but now that he probably thinks differently, Chris admits that he's actually interested. Unfortunately, Simone found herself in the hall with her tactile friend Stacy, who had already grabbed the hero's cheeks. She admits that she is very glad to see him. The girl is now absolutely free, as she is studying in graduate school. Simone comes up behind her and slaps her on the ass so that she finally sits properly on the exercise machine and lets go of Chris. She invites her friend to play volleyball, which seems like a pretty fun idea. They move into the hall. Stacy is already standing ready with all weapons, as she loves volleyball. Chris is surprised at this change of location. They seem to want to talk about Ninal, and what does volleyball have to do with it? Simone will ask him if he knows where Ninal's parents work. The young man heard that her father is a diplomat, and her mother is either a famous writer or the president of a writers' association. He suggests that because of this it will be difficult to win her attention, because she must be used to being alone. When he passes, Simone replies that this is not really the case. Her parents gave her a happy childhood so that she could choose who she wanted to be. But because of their work, Ninal moved often, so she often changed schools. She didn't have time to make friends with anyone and didn't really communicate with people. So she's not so much cold as she doesn't know how to communicate. He wants to know the answers to other questions, but Simone says that the next submission is his. Stacy was already looming over him, ready to hit him into the floor of the gym with this ball. Instead of serving, Chris covers his face with his hands and the ball ends up flying right at him. Simone notes that due to his inability to play, he subconsciously tries to dodge the sword. These words unexpectedly prompted him to have unusual thoughts about Ninal. Since childhood, she had little contact with people, and she often had to change schools, so she did not have time to communicate with people. Therefore, I subconsciously decided not to communicate with any other people anymore. And so, faced with emotional problems, she tried to come up with a solution: to hide behind a fake relationship. Her self-defense, which others perceive as aloofness, has made her a quiet girl who loves to read books. Even he thought so at first. Simone admits that this is why they dragged her into the literary club. Even after they left, they forced her to become president so that she could communicate with people, and lately she herself has been trying very hard to become closer to some people. Simone is interested to know what Chris thinks about their friend now. Stacy runs up to the hero and decides to find out if they can entrust him with the heart of little Ninal. As a result, on this day the hero spent wonderful hours with his fake girlfriend's friends, learning a lot of new things about her. After their conversation, he finally began to understand Ninal that she is not the Snow Queen. It's just hard for her to get along with people. Maybe she is not obsessed with literature, but is simply trying to understand how other people see this world in this way. And, in the end, there is a huge difference between the inability to talk and unwillingness. Now Chris knows her story, but can't figure out how to get along with her. The next day, in the cafeteria, he volunteered to bring himself and his friends cold colas from the machine. Having paid for a can of soda, he immediately wanted to take it out, but then someone's hand reached into the slot of the machine and snatched his cola from him. Chris doesn't like that someone took his property, so he quickly grabs the thief's hand. But having looked at the man, he realizes that Tana is standing in front of him. She embarrassedly asks how long he planned to grab her hand and not let go. It's not that she's against it, it's just that someone might think that the deputy is a scumbag and is trying to sit on two chairs at once. Chris decides to push her sharply against the wall, since there are a lot of people here and they might be misunderstood. Out of surprise, Tana lets go of the can of cola. It hits the floor and begins to gush out sweet liquid in all directions. All the president's clothes and feet are drenched in sweet syrup. Her eyes, full of hatred, fixed their gaze on the deputy, asking if he was thirsty for blood. Chris feels like a little rabbit in front of a fierce fox. The young man wants to say a few words to her, but she orders him to shut up, since she is not talking to him. Chris decides to tell her that they are attracting too much unnecessary attention, but the president decides that it is his fault. He suggests they just take the food with them and go somewhere far away since there's barely any room, but Tana tells him not to worry. The Mandarin Duck solved this problem before they met, and quite by chance they sit next to each other. Melinda also decided to come for lunch and, seeing Chris at the table, hurried to sit down with him. Everyone sitting at the table immediately paid special attention to her. The girl calmly sat down next to him. Chris is happy that he can finally eat while other people are around. Melinda will behave normally. He was able to dodge the bullet. Tana warns that they are having a spontaneous student council meeting. Melinda grabs Chris's leg and calls him stupid. She said to wait for her at lunch, but he forgot again. In the midst of their argument, some kind of threat seemed to hang over their table. Ninal, approaching their table, mentions that all the seats are already taken, and if they have already finished eating, she asks permission to sit down. A tense silence hangs at the table. Bob and Dash decide to quickly get away from the typhoon approaching them. As a result, Chris finds himself surrounded by women who are ready to rip each other's throats out at any moment. Tana decides to break the silence and asks the Mandarin if she has a sheet with the distribution of the budget for the clubs. The girl gives a positive answer, because she finished it 2 days ago, but wants to know why she needs it. The president explains that this year they don't have such a big budget, and there are fewer sponsors, so she thought that she could save money somehow. While finishing her sandwich, this idea seems quite reasonable to the Mandarin and she wants to know what the head of the student council came up with on this matter. Tana suggests cutting the budget of some clubs, and she also knows that members of some clubs use money for personal purposes, and this is a violation of the rules, and she has one in mind. Chris begins to get nervous, hoping that she is not planning to do anything bad with the book club. The president continues to say that if they dissolve such clubs, they will be able to save a lot of money. Mandarin woman supports her initiative. Not paying attention to these conversations, Ninal stands up on the bench and, inviting Chris to try her food, quickly stuffs a piece of meat into his mouth. The young man notes that this is a very tasty dish. Tana begins to lose her temper, noticing that her attack is not producing results. Ninal still decides to ask about the closure of which club we are talking about now. To everyone's surprise, the president started talking about closing the Love Exploration Club. It would be even better if they disbanded this pointless club. Chris is amazed that Tana really decided to lag behind the literary club. The Love Study Club, in his opinion, is nonsense, but there is nothing to punish them for. Suddenly, Melinda goes on the attack and also decided to treat the guy with her cooking. Today she has sweet and sour dumplings on her menu. She doesn't like that herself, so she decided to leave it for him. She doesn't see anything unusual in this. He's eaten something after her before. Seeing this picture, Ninal understands that even though Melinda is a clear threat, she is still his friend and the girl will have to get along with her. Ninal decided that she could join the conversation, so she decided to demonstrate her observation and say that Melinda is also picky. Miss Spring perceives this as a provocation in her direction, but she is confident that she will never lose to her. She decides to accept her signature argument about the fact that she is still growing, but Ninal tells her that this is not very correct. Melinda is scared by the expression on her rival's face. Why is she receiving threats from her even though she has not done anything? But after thinking a little, she comes to the conclusion that her rival specifically wants to make her worry. Melinda stands up and tells Chris to imagine an inflated balloon and think about what is in it. But she doesn't let him give an answer and simply whispers that there is only air in it, and hints that he still won't burst it. Having said all this, she decides to leave, but Ninal decides to find out from Chris what the girl wanted to say. He smiles at her and says that he has no idea what those words were about. But in general, he understood everything to himself. At first she meant that she was angry, and then she hinted that his relationship was not real. Tana decides to defuse the situation and resolve another issue from the student council. The point is that now many students have relationships, even if this is not prohibited by the rules, but still she considers this not the best example, especially from members of the student council, and they will have to deal with it. Tana announces that she is thinking about amending the rules and prohibiting relationships between students. After all, it is for the sake of academic performance. She is sure that parents and students must agree. Chris immediately opposes this decision, and then Ninal enters the discussion. She wants to ask the president something. Ninal thought about how quickly Chris ate. Perhaps he was very hungry. As she continued to eat lunch, the thought came to her that it would be better to be on good terms with Tana. After all, if they ignore her, then she will find out that her relationship with Chris is fake. And then one interesting thought came into the girl's head. Ninal decides not to hesitate and, looking closely at Tanya, turned to her with the intention of asking something. Her rival was greatly strained by her gaze, and she managed to worry whether Ninal had noticed something. Meanwhile, the girl, completely unaware of Tana's treachery, decided to admit that she wanted to invite Chris to the literary club. Therefore, the girl wants to know if the student council president will allow this. Hearing this, Tana immediately turned away. She was amazed at the impudence of her rival. She not only decided to take Chris away, but also to tell her about it to her face. Does she really know something that only she and the Mandarin can know? Tana believes that we need to figure out what's going on. Everyone considers Ninal to be the Snow Queen. Because of her tone and facial expression there is such an impression. The president decides to contact his deputy and find out if he really wants to join the literary club. Chris immediately began to panic and Tana noticed this. She thinks that he does not have the courage to do this. The Mandarin decides to join this conversation, saying that of course no one forbids the young man to join other clubs, but he also needs to think about the life of the school, so she advises him to remain on the student council. The main character didn't even have time to understand how this red-haired beast ended up nearby. Even under this pressure he promises that he will deal with his responsibilities before he leaves. Ninal decides to make some kind of compromise, saying that Chris can attend the literary club in his free time, when he has it. Smiling sweetly, Tana notes that, nevertheless, the young man is now the deputy president and therefore she is afraid that another club will distract him from the affairs of the student council. The opponent does not back down and declares that she can handle the work in her club herself and will not burden Chris with this. The main character feels pressure from all sides, but, seeing how serious Ninal is, he thinks that if this goes on, the president will have to surrender. To everyone's surprise, Tana asks for forgiveness and falls silent while everyone sits in silent shock. After a pause, she says that 2 days ago they received a request from the City Tourist Association, so now they are up to their necks in work. There is a whole bunch of different things to do when they need people. Having said this, she began to sarcastically rub her little hands, realizing that they would have to reckon with this reason. While Chris is in a stupor because he knows nothing about such a request, Tana decides to continue the performance and began to lament that it seems to her that the deputy's thoughts are somewhere else. It seems to her that he no longer cares about the important issues of the student council. Ninal apologizes for the disturbance and, resigning herself, says that in this case they can ignore her today's request, adding that she understands how valuable it is that the three of them care about the students. The president smiles modestly back at her and, brushing her off, says that it's just their job. After waiting for Ninal to disappear from sight, Tana loudly asks for forgiveness from Chris. She admits that she didn't think everything through very well when she spoke with Ninal. The girl thought only about the benefits of the student council, completely forgetting about the deputy. Tana, putting on an innocent face, decides that, nevertheless, maybe it's all because of Chris, so in fact it's not her fault. Realizing that it is useless to argue with the presidents, the young man suggests getting closer to the point and telling him about the assignment from the Tourist Association. It turns out that this year the association wants to add a couple of articles about the city through the eyes of young people, and that is exactly what they should do. While Mandarin and Chris were thinking about how this could be done, Tana already said that she had a couple of ideas, but she was not sure that they would agree with her, and yet, first, the guys decided to listen to the president's proposals. After listening to the ideas, they immediately decided to go and inform one of their leaders about it, but after hearing about the proposal from the association, she immediately flatly refused them, even though the school treats the three of them very well, but in her opinion the project is too serious for them. The manager quickly kicked them out the door, shouting after them that she was very grateful to them for their efforts and if they needed help, they could turn to her. The tangerine is angry. They didn't even have time to really say anything. Tana calmly commands everyone to follow her, because they still won't be able to persuade the leader. The girl decides not to give up and invite the president to try again and call even more, and Chris wants to know if Tana has any other ideas. But the girl does not seem to hear their questions and only asks the young man in response if he will come to her tomorrow. After all, then she will definitely tell him everything. Chris is embarrassed and wants to know if what she is talking about is true. The tangerine realizes that the president started all this for a reason, so she grabs the deputy's hand and says that they will wait for him. Left alone in the office with Chris, the girl decides to find out if he can prepare for tomorrow. The young man does not understand why he needs to prepare when going to the president. The only thing that comes to his mind is that it is not polite to go empty-handed, so he wants to take milk and eggs with him. His reasoning makes the Mandarin duck think that he is just mocking him. Realizing that the boy is still quite inexperienced, the girl decides to help him. After all, it's good that she listens to her mother and puts on her play, but Chris, hearing this, becomes completely confused and frankly doesn't understand anything. The Mandarin visualizes that if the chairman invited them to her family villa, then Chris should appear there in a classic suit and tie. Then he must wait until the president opens the door for him. The girl will greet him fully armed. An obligatory step for a gentleman is, of course, to give a lady a bouquet of flowers. The director can already see how Tana will begin to blush from embarrassment and how the girl will worry about her appearance. Therefore, the young man will have to take her hand and gently say that she is the treasure of his heart, and that he will definitely love her in any form. After hearing this scenario, Chris wants to erase it from his imagination. He is against these gestures with his hands. The young man considers this to be too much and tells the Mandarin that they did not agree that way. The girl reasons that the president might really not like this persistence and gallantry. Meanwhile, Chris wants to know what she'll do tomorrow if she's sitting here now. The Mandarin duck confirms that he is just killing time now, and tomorrow he will wait for good news and photos. She sighs and notes that she endures all this suffering just for the sake of it. Chris is only concerned with one question: why he will have to do all this. Once visiting Tana, the young man decided to put on a suit. The president told him to sit down while she went for drinks. Suddenly he heard a motor roaring outside and someone slowing down right at the entrance to the villa. The girl, seeing him on a motorcycle, decides to clarify whether the young man is Tana's boyfriend. but the deputy hastened to answer no and say that he is here to discuss work issues. Heading towards him, the stranger keeps up with questions and wants to know if he likes Tana. Wondering why the girl asks him such strange questions, Chris replies that they are just classmates and nothing more. The answer turns out to be as simple as shelling pears. The stranger reports that Tanya likes the young man. The girl finally decides to take off her helmet, believing that if this is the president's classmate, then everything is in order. The stranger introduced herself as a creditor of the Sinclair family, and now she has come to collect the debt. Since Tana's parents' investments were unsuccessful, they have been borrowing money from her for the past few years. The debt should have been repaid last year, but they decided to postpone it until today. Luckily for her, this family has such a beautiful daughter, for whom you can get quite a bit of money. Chris begins to wonder if things are really that bad in Tana's family. Maybe it's just a joke. But seeing the rope in the hands of the creditor, the main character understands that this is too much even for a prank. Hearing the creditor trying in every possible way to call Tana, Chris shouts for the girl to stop. He also decides to use physical force and pulls the girl by her top jacket, but an embarrassment occurs and he accidentally exposes part of the creditor's body. The lady turns out to be not the timid type and, taking the young man by the tie, deftly lays him on the ground, saying that she thought of him as a hero, but he disappointed her. So she wants to teach him a lesson and swings her fist at the deputy with all her might. Out of fear, Chris closed his eyes, waiting for karma to fly into his face, but for some reason there was no blow. Opening his eyes, he saw the creditor sitting on him, bursting into laughter, holding his stomach. Approaching the window and hearing this ringing laugh, Tana immediately realized that trouble had come to her house. Clicking Chris on the forehead, the girl laughs and cannot believe that he is so naive and fell for all this. She decides to introduce herself again. Her name is Kira Sinclair. She is Tana's cousin. She studies at the capital's acting academy. This year she entered. Kira decided to add the size of her breasts to the information available about her. But the young man was unable to hear this information, since Tana was behind Kira, who covered her mouth with her hand and asked for forgiveness for her sister. Chris had already thought that mocking people was a hobby of the Sinclair family. Tanu was wondering why Kira decided to come today, but it turns out that she found out that today they are having a family dinner, and her sister's classmate will come to it. Kira was amused by the fact that her Tana invited a guy to her house for dinner, and she thought that this was a reason to visit her. Seeing her sister's embarrassment, the girl realizes that she most likely understood everything correctly. Tana, meanwhile, feels angry and thinks that her little sister knows too much and this could become a problem. Chris decides to dilute this sibling squabble and say that they will only discuss work here. He decides to tell them that their classmate was still supposed to join them, but she cannot attend today. For greater confidence, he decided to dial the Mandarin so that Kira could be convinced of the veracity of his words. The girl turns around and, heading to the mansion, says that this is all very boring. She wants to know what time dinner will be, to which Tana recommends taking her food from the bowl by the door. Going inside, Chris wants to close the door, and Tana turns around and sees that her sister is about to do something bad. The president runs up to the deputy and quickly covers his eyes, asking what Kira is up to. By this time, the girl had taken off her shirt and was left in only a bra and shorts. She forgot to say that due to today's heat she wanted to go to the beach. Kira decides to turn the topic to the guys, asking if they are standing too close to each other, maybe they are stuck. Tana decides to say that Chris is too young to see this, but in reality, of course, she doesn't want him to look at other girls. Kira decides to approach the guys and try to remove her sister's hands from the young man's eyes. The president decides to act decisively and, grabbing his sister, she drags her away. They both end up in the locker room, and Tana, leaning out from behind the door, asks Chris to close the curtains. The deputy obediently carries out the assignment and increasingly does not understand what is happening here, whether they will definitely discuss the article for the tourist bureau. Tana was finally able to exhale. This family scene was over. She decides to turn to her sister and, turning around, finds that Kira is already standing nearby. The sister begins to blush and embarrassedly say that they are blood relatives. But Kira thinks that this is even very good. After hearing these words from Tan, she does not understand what her sister means. The girl moves closer to her sister and invites her to change clothes together. Kira had already managed to pull her panty thread, but Tana pushed her sister away, saying that she was embarrassing, and also asked her to leave. The sister wants to know this because Tana chose a strange swimsuit and now it's awkward to wear it for a guy. And seeing Tana's violent reaction, she decides to ask if she likes Chris. The president decides that it's time to end this performance. Kira will be right if he calls her at Sundara and she accepts her silence as consent. She wonders how much longer she will treat her like a child. Kira decides that then she can go and ask Chris directly. Such a statement almost made her sister fall out of her chair. Tana sarcastically declares that she will not let her sister go. But this is not particularly important to Kira. since the girl herself is unlikely to be able to do this. After all, her amazingly elegant and beautiful cousin would definitely not allow something to appear on her. Tana realizes with horror that she is not wearing panties. She shouts at Kira to find out when she managed to pull this off. The girl remembers how deftly she untied the knots on her panties, but decided to answer out loud that she didn't know. Kira says goodbye to her cousin and says that she will come back when she gets tired of playing. She approached the young man already in a swimsuit, telling him that Tanya needed to settle some matters and for now she would stay with him. She noticed that the room was too hot and Chris embarrassedly agreed with her. Sitting on the water slide, she states that she always wanted to try this, and her cousin didn't even tell her that she had such a cool thing. She extends her hand to Chris and offers to go for a ride with her, but the young man refuses. But he is offered a lucrative deal. If Kira loses with him, she will show many childhood photographs of Tana. There is nothing to be done. He believes that he must get photographs, so he strives to quickly sit in a circle. Quickly sliding down the water slide, Kira had already thought that these two had a rather strange relationship. Meanwhile, Chris understands that he would never have thought that the image of Tana's sister would be so radically different from her behavior. Having successfully slipped into the pool, the main character received the promised reward in the form of a phone with a photo. Kira decides to ask if the young man likes it in her sister's house, to which Chris responds positively, while simultaneously looking at the photo. But there is one thing, but in these pictures, for some reason they are all just ordinary, eerily perfect. But to his surprise, he managed to stumble upon some strange photograph. Showing this picture to Kira, the girl laughed and offered to tell Chris a story. The young man was interested in this topic, and the girl added that this is a story about a girl who met a guy with whom she later fell in love. But then, at the top of the slide, Kira was called by her sister's familiar voice. Tana stood at the top and pointed out to her that her sister clearly intentionally wanted to splash in the water with the guy. But she was unable to finish her tirade. She slipped on the slide and quickly flew down into the pool. Apparently the girl was in such a hurry that she didn't bother to tie her swimsuit tightly, and as a result of such a rapid flight it flew off her and ended up on Chris's head. The young man, only holding this piece of clothing in his hands, realized the desperation of the situation, and Tana remained standing in the water, covering her chest and burning with shame. The story of that same photo begins with the fact that when a girl first starts liking someone, she feels awkward. Until the heroine met him, she couldn't even think that she would like a guy from school, because every day the boys were fooling around, and she watched it. Kira was always attracted to older, more mature guys, and she was fully confident that she would meet her love only after graduating from school. But on our path in life sometimes we meet strange people. As a child and at school, she liked strong and straightforward men, but she eventually became close to a guy from school and fell in love with him. His naivety and stupidity fascinated her. Before she would not have even looked at him, but she really liked him. In the midst of this frank story, Chris, gathering his strength, approaches Tanya and decides to help her put on her swimsuit. Kira may have been frightened by such sudden changes, but she could not help herself. The girl wanted so much to become closer to him, but could not say so easily. She could communicate as usual, and use homework checking as an excuse or reprimand him in class for inattention. Kira adds that the committee clearly cannot cope with such a volume of work. Everyone around seems stupid to her, but it turns out that she is the one who is so naive. All this is as if a stupid schoolboy is teasing the girl he likes. Listening to Kira's words, the sister clearly understands what she's driving at. Tana decides to hug her sister and tell her that she understands her pain, pointing out that, apparently, Kira cannot stop thinking and being sad about her first love. And the cousin decides to find out by confessing to the guy whether her little sister is thinking about something bad. Kira is sarcastic and replies that it should be interesting for both the narrator and the listener. Taking Tana gently by the face and looking straight into her eyes, she wonders if she remembers what happened next. Time passed too quickly, and Kira was still able to tell him that she liked him, and last summer vacation she saw him at the airport. And it seems he already has someone. Kira was well aware of the consequences of her choice. There is always something that is better left in the past. Because of this, she now has something to tell two stupid schoolchildren. Tana looks back at Chris and thinks that this fool simply won't understand all this. Seeing her cousin's sad and thoughtful look, Kira says that she will go now, sleep and not disturb them. Finally, she wished her sister to try her best. This is how the unexpected meeting with the sister, who acted like some kind of teacher, ended, and she and the president returned to what they were going to do. While Mandarin, working from home, managed to write something, he and Tana had to finish the text and decide on illustrations for the draft, but Chris realized too late that they both had something in common. The main character cannot stand it and begins to ask the president about what is correct. Tana looks up from her tablet and wants to know what's going on. It turns out that the young man was worried that the president promised to make a sketch and he was curious about how she draws. The president gets funny from his screams, and she notes that the weather forecast was not wrong. It's very hot now and you need to drink more water. Chris froze in a frenzy when Tana showed him the portrait she had drawn of him. The young man does not understand whether they are talking about the same thing. At this moment the girl asks him not to move, because she is almost finished. As she continued to draw, the rumbling in her stomach became more and more clearly audible, so she decides to tell Chris that she is really hungry. But the young man immediately flatly favors her, since his little sister forbade bad girls from cooking. Tana immediately began to sulk with anger and offered to take a risk and break this promise once. They decided to solve this dilemma with a game called 5 in a row. This is an ancient strategic game that develops intelligence and thinking, trains the mind and teaches perfection. Chris understands that today he must get his hands dirty and defeat the white-haired villainess, but Tana decisively attacks him. Having quickly defeated the enemy, she says with a satisfied grin that it is already starting to get dark, and the deputy will have to do something. She was about to get up to take the loser to the kitchen and force her to cook food for her, but suddenly the young man suddenly grabbed her hand. Chris understands that he cannot give up so easily and therefore demands revenge from the fox. Tana understands that her deputy does not know how to lose at all. In such cases, the girl decides to raise the stakes and says that in this case he will have to fulfill 30 wishes, including washing, changing bed linen and his complete obedience to her. She is quite sure that without serious bets they will not be interested in playing. Chris agrees to this. If she defeats him this time, then he will be completely at her disposal for the entire next semester. But if she loses to him, she will have to forgive his debts. The girl is lost in thought, because she has already planned everything for a long time, but in the end she still decides to agree to his proposal. The guys were very tense during the game, as the stakes were extremely high, and from time to time Tana was nervous and made mistakes. But the young man was not calm either. His sweaty hands held the pieces. Fortunately, after several moves, he figured out her strategy. She deliberately left vulnerable spots, distracting him, in order to turn the course of the game in her direction. But even this did not give him an advantage. In the end, Tana won again. The girl could not even recover from joy. The thought that he had been at her disposal for a whole semester had already made her head spin, and now she was ready to go with the young man to the kitchen to prepare dinner. But Chris grabs her hand again and says once again that he has a proposal. He seriously declares that he will be at her beck and call until graduation and even at university. This makes Tana think very hard again. She cannot agree to this, because if she loses, then everything that she already has will be crossed out. Seeing how doubtful she is, Chris grabs her and promises that he will obey her unquestioningly if she loses. A bunch of indecent thoughts immediately begin to creep into the president's head, and the young man adds fuel to the fire, shouting that he will completely obey her. Saying this, he does not even understand what is in Tana's head now. The girl herself did not notice how she announced their last decisive game. If she wins this time too, then she won't agree to such a rematch again. But she didn't even have time to really do anything, and Chris had already collected 5 in a row and won. His whole life almost went downhill. He promised himself to never gamble again. Meanwhile, Tana returned from her dream world and realized that she had now lost her life. Chris decides to clarify that in fact it was he who almost lost his life a couple of minutes ago. The girl decides that she, too, can persuade her opponent to play one more time, and if he wins, then she will be his for the rest of her life. Even having said this, she thinks that in the end everything will be as she wants. The young man predictably refuses her and declares that he has had enough of this gambling. But Tana does not calm down and decides that if the new conditions do not suit him, then they can leave the old ones. If he loses, he will cook. If he wins, he will get whatever he wants. Chris understands that this girl has already completely lost her mind. Seeing the lack of enthusiasm in the deputy's eyes, Tana calls him a brute with a downcast look. Because of his bets, she wants to play further. If this continues, he will definitely win, and all her efforts will be in vain. Tana is already starting to get hysterical and declares that she will be unhappy all her life because of him. Chris decides to also express his dissatisfaction to her. Because she was sad, she interested him in such bets. And when the situation got completely out of control, the girl allowed him to fly into the abyss, and as a result, with these words she managed to pacify the president. This is how the story of a guy who almost fell into the abyss of gambling ended. After leaving the Sinclair house, Chris decided for some reason to go to his school. And only on the way, one thought came to his mind. He was at the president's house so that they could work on the brochure. He doesn't understand at all what was happening today. On his way, he saw a store where the lights were still on. He decided to go there in the hope of looking for inspiration and looking through old magazines. But when he looks inside, to his surprise he finds Melinda lying on the floor reading a book. Hearing that someone had entered the store, the girl was distracted from reading and, seeing that the person who had entered was Chris, she immediately perked up noticeably. The young man decides to find out if Aunt Rika will scold her daughter for returning home late. But Melinda declares that nothing like that will happen. She immediately begins to portray the character of the book. Next, the girl's face changes and with admiration asks to be allowed to touch Chris's chest. The young man clearly did not expect such a request from her. Melinda immediately noticed his shocked expression and noted that she had not actually said anything like that. The girl becomes more attached to the hero and explains that she simply read in a book that the stronger the heartbeat of a living creature, the shorter its life and vice versa. Having listened, she realizes that Chris's heart is pounding. She throws him to the ground and anxiously asks if he will die so early. Feeling that her heart is starting to beat faster, she also begins to think that there is not much of it left. Chris gets up and doesn't understand what his friend is talking about. He even wanted to know if her brains had turned to mush, but Melinda objects, because she read this in a biology book. Throwing the book aside, on the last page the young man notices the handwritten name Yasmin Liwa. Noticing Chris's worried look, Melinda picks up the book and says that it seems that this inscription was left by a girl. She wonders if he knows her. Chris sighs and tells her to forget it and suggests changing the subject. He mentions that someone he knows dropped out of school for some reason, and this place just sells a lot of old books. Melinda imitates him and says that the young man is surrounded by so many girls that she is even scared to imagine how many beautiful sisters there are in the world. Chris laughs and reminds him that he only has one sister, so he doesn't understand how there can be many of them. Melinda turns away and says she's sorry because they didn't meet in high school. Now the phrase, "if only he and Melinda had known each other in junior high," kept repeating loudly in Chris's head. Indeed, if he had met Miss Spring before her, who would she have been to him? The next morning, Chris woke up to a call from the president, who, in a veiled manner, spoke about some problems that had arisen. Hearing about this, the young man decided to immediately rush to the student council room. Having flown into the office, he was already all on nerves, and Melinda and Tana were already waiting for him in the room. To Chris's surprise, Ninal also appeared in the corner of the office. She declares that since everyone is assembled, they can start. The main character has already managed to think if they have called his sister. Suddenly, he heard a man's voice behind him and, turning around, he saw that Ashton from the Cunero school had entered the office and greeted everyone from the threshold. This raises even more questions for the main character as to why this guy is here. Chris finally decides to ask what is the matter, but Ninal replies that she has no idea. The teacher called her in the morning and said that the students need help and the rest are in the same situation. Sitting down at the table, Ashton declares that now he will explain everything. The guys did not make a sketch for the travel agency, and of course this has nothing to do with the relationship between the schools, but he, as the organizer, has a hard time. And he states that he wants the work to be done by his management. Chris begins to whisper with Tana, saying that they should have discussed questions on this topic next week. The girl displeasedly notes that if they cope with this task, they will receive points towards the final grades. Ninal joins the conversation and notes that as far as she knows, they are connected only by business cooperation. Ashton interrupts her monologue, taking the girl by the hand and turning to her, saying that he madly admires her literary talent. And he suggests discussing the following text together in your free time. Ninal doesn't answer him a word and just looks intently into his eyes. Ashton removes his hand. He becomes terrified by the expression on the girl's face. He is so scared that he asks her to have pity on him. Ninal is shocked by this, but doesn't show it. Tanya begins to get tired of Ashton. She wants him to disappear from here. She turns to him with an offer to talk to him this afternoon. She states that she would like to hear his suggestions for editing. Ashton, like a faithful dog, immediately agrees to the president's proposal. Chris understands that if Tana is furious, then she becomes a real devil, and besides, if the president decided to put someone in his place, this person will not find it enough. Ashton did not notice anything and already imagined himself irresistible, since even the rich girl could not resist him. He believes that he needs to take advantage of this situation and take revenge. He sarcastically greets Melinda. The young man reports that the photographs in the magazine are not worthy of attention, and they are not as magnificent as her work. Chris sighs and thinks about stopping this circus as soon as possible. He wants to tell Ashton something. Tana notices this and begins to think that the deputy wants to stand up for Melinda. The president doesn't understand how they managed to get so close to Miss Spring. He used to avoid her. Chris sees Tana's stern look and thinks that she is so unhappy with Ashton, and he urgently needs to end this. And gathering his courage, he puts on a pretty face and decides to ask what they will have for lunch. Today is a day off and he knows that the Western dining room is probably closed, and decides to find out where they will go to eat. These are not the words everyone present here wanted to hear. Ashton approaches Chris and shouts at him so that they don't dare ignore him. Since he gives them work, the young man begins in response to simply name the words: meeting, conference, leadership, championship. Main character wants to know personally what other words can describe Ashton's personality. He wants to know whether the young man is ready to take full responsibility for the work upon himself. If those present at the meeting do not have the right to choose, this makes no sense, since the final decision is made by one person, or whether Ashton only wants to amuse his selfish pride. The enemy enters the argument and asks if the deputy president has a solution since he is talking to him like that. And if you believe his words, no one has the right to decide everything individually, then he invites everyone to speak out. Chris decides to say that he and Melinda had been racking their brains about this topic all night. The moment the girls heard about the night, they visibly tensed up. The main character led Ashton to the exit, saying that the young man would probably be able to handle the work himself, and they would only wait for the results. The enemy agreed and noted that dealing with the brochures would not be so difficult. Chris adds that it would be great if one person did everything. Let Ashton do his job. This will show his dedication to the team and the cause. Only at this moment does the student realize that everyone just wants to blame everything on him. Out of anger, he even grabbed Chris by the jacket, shouting that he would not allow this to be done to him. But the main character didn't even have the opportunity to answer, since the president's leg had already thrown Ashton's body away with force. Tana seems to have broken free. She starts screaming at him and says that he can do everything on his own, and if he continues to be foolish, she will bury him alive. As soon as Ashton was outside the door, Tana turned and, with the same scream, asked what happened last night. Chris begins to shrink with fear and excitement. Once again he wanted to do everything better, but all his efforts went to waste. Tana, realizing that she had clearly gone too far, turned around, cleared her throat and tried to come to her senses. She transforms back into her pretty self and calmly asks what plan the guys came up with last night. Melinda begins to say that yesterday she met Chris at the bookstore. Chris was obviously worried about something yesterday, so she found a lot of old magazines. And then she realized something, that it's better to calmly figure something out than to lash out. Eventually, she and Chris decided that they needed to make a survey for the students, and Melinda decided to show off their work right away. Tana freezes with a tense expression on her face, and Miss Spring doesn't understand why she's looking at her like that. But looking at her materials, she realizes with horror that she had just shown her rival an album with photos of her and Chris together. While Melinda tries to understand how this happened, Tana realizes that her rival beat her last night. Ninel decides to lighten this tense moment by offering Chris lemon tea. The young man notes that her tea is very tasty. He would drink it with pleasure every day. Tana again feels superior to the other girl over her. While contemplating a counterattack, she comes up with the idea that maybe she should deal with an easier target before fighting the boss. The president notes that the idea of a questionnaire can really help. Tana suggests that her deputy go to Cunero school after lunch, a proposal that clearly shocks Chris. He immediately wants to know why the president is there. Melinda looks up from the album and asks why Chris is so nervous. Tana smilingly notes that the deputy's younger sister studies at Cunero school and it will be easier to conduct a survey there. Arriving at the entrance gate, the president decides to ask Melinda if she has seen Chris' little sister. Miss Spring mentions that they only met briefly at the hot springs, and now their first meeting may occur. Tana replies that it will be very healthy, since Molly's sister is very sweet. Chris complains about how he is dying from the heat. Melinda stretches sweetly and says that it's enough to stay locked up, and they need to at least sometimes go out into the sun. The main character, standing with a huge stack of papers in his hands, freezes at these words. He shouts for her to get up and stand in the sun with him. Melinda, clinging to his leg, begins to beg him not to force her to get up. How did the others even dare to throw her into the heat? Suddenly Chris realizes that he doesn't know where Ninel is, and the president took Mandarin to the club to fill out a form, and little sister had to go with them. Suddenly, Melinda shouts out that she saw Ninel and points in the direction. Perhaps the girl right now headed to the dance hall, where Molly might be now. Their last meeting obviously didn't go very well. Entering the hall, the girls immediately met their gazes. They clearly did not know what the outcome of their conversation would be. Molly wants to know why this girl is here. Ninel directly answers that she came here because of her brother. Little sister immediately shouts that Ninel should not even dare to talk about him. Bending down to pick up some booklet lying on the floor, the girl decides to ask Molly. She is so angry because some friend transferred to another school. The girl does not understand how she managed to find out about this, but Ninel explains that student records are given after graduation, and if someone receives one during the school semester, of course he will be transferred. Molly wonders if she had a friend who once went abroad. Ninel notes that this is possible, but usually it was she who suddenly disappeared. Because of her parents' work, she constantly had to part with her friends, and as a result, she began to consider herself a minor character in some story. Seeing the silent question in Molly's eyes, she explains that a minor character is something like a supporting actor. She read a lot of novels and often noticed characters who disappeared as abruptly as they appeared. Most often they are so bright that they add flavor to the story and move the plot forward. but they are completely unimportant. Ninal says that sometimes she writes stories about them to reveal their character, even though they still have no future. After hearing this, Molly rushes to hug Ninal, saying that the girl is not a minor character at all. She, sobbing, says that her sister is the main character of her own story, and even if she is a minor character, then only among the main characters. Looking into the dance class, Chris and Melinda don't understand what these two are doing. Behind them, out of nowhere, Tana refuses and wonders what these two have forgotten here. It was so unexpected that Chris and Melinda screamed and jumped away from the door. Melinda accidentally touches Tanu with her foot, as if tripping her, and the president no longer notices how he is flying down. The tangerine arrived in time to the complete picture of chaos. The guys collapsed on each other like dominoes. All this noise makes Molly pay attention to the door, and there she immediately saw her brother, but when she saw all the other girls and especially the fox with white hair, the smile disappeared from her face. The girl gets up and screams about how the fox dared to come here with her brother. Ninal stops her and asks if she remembers her agreement with Chris. Hearing that she remembers this, the girl pulls her little sister towards her and whispers something in her ear. Melinda, trying to crawl out from under the rubble, starts screaming for the guys to get off her. Suddenly, the phone falls in front of Miss Spring, and, looking at its screensaver, her eyes begin to widen in surprise. As it turned out, this is Tana's phone that he dropped, and on her screensaver there is Chris with an excerpt from the very video that she filmed in the store. Heading towards the exit, Ninal's words were spinning in Molly's head, that under the pressure of the girls, Chris might give up. Molly sits down next to Melinda. After asking her name, she wants to know what to do. The Mandarin, continuing to observe, was completely confused. She immediately understood Ninal's plan to cleverly destroy her rival with the wrong hands. The little sister puts on her most pretty face and declares that the cake that her brother brought was so delicious, and Melinda must have baked it. The girl clearly followed Ninal's plan. Molly is sad to hear from her brother that she has to take care of him at school, and she asks the girl to make cakes for her next time, to which Miss Spring immediately agrees. The tangerine is in a panic. The girl does not understand what is happening, why the president is not doing anything, because her treasure is about to go into the hands of the enemy. The assistant realizes that she can't let Molly ruin everything. The tangerine screams to the girls that everything is fine and the questionnaire is almost ready, and besides all this, she suggests they go to the store and buy something to drink. She also grabs Tanu's hand and insistently asks her to follow her. The red-haired woman does not forget to grab Chris, who is not yet fully recovered, by the collar and drags him along. Left alone with her rival, Melinda decides to ask Tanya a question about that screensaver on her screen lock. The girl wants to know if the president specifically allowed her to see this photo. Tana denies this, and considering the whole situation, Melinda should not have seen this at all. Because of this, Tana feels guilty. Melinda decides to admit that at first she thought that they would become good friends, but in the end this is apparently impossible. At this time, Chris entered the dance class. He noticed the girls who were curious why he came back. The boy explains that Molly said that she was going home, so he came to get her bag. Melinda jumps off the ballet bar and announces that it is late and she too will go home. As soon as the girl disappeared behind the door, Tana decides to find out if Chris heard their conversation, to which the hero answers in the negative. This gives the girl peace of mind, and she asks him not to think about it. Chris absolutely does not understand anything, and Tana, smiling, says that she would not be able to explain this to him anyway. The sound of an SMS came from the girl's phone. A family had come for the president, and so it was time for her to go too. Seeing the phone in Tana's hands, Chris decides to find out if there is really a screensaver with him on her phone. But the president ignores his question and decides to quickly rein in his deputy and reminds him of his punishment. He must do what she says. The girl also mentions that she asked someone else to fill out the forms, and they should now be in the security room. She gives Chris an order to sort it out by tomorrow, and if something goes wrong, the blame will not be on her. The young man notes that Tana is so fickle, but the president objects to him and says that in some situations she is unshakable, and to this she adds that they will see each other tomorrow. After such a threat, he was eventually able to sort out the questionnaires, but at the same time he forgot about something very important. Carrying a huge pile of papers, he wonders if this is just a survey, then why are there so many questionnaires? The young man won't even be able to finish reading them. Walking along the corridor, he hears a strange noise from the office of the literary club. Apparently Ninal has not yet gone home. The main character decides to look through the crack of the door and find out if anyone is there at such a late hour, and to his surprise he found Ninal standing on all fours in the room. Tana, who was reaching for food in the refrigerator, heard a scream behind her, and decides to quickly turn around. Chris immediately turns away and, covering his eyes with his hands, tries to reassure the girl that he didn't see anything. The young man feels something cold on his cheek, and cannot understand how everything turned out this way. Having closed his eyes from the rhinestone, he hears Ninal's offer to try something. Opening his eyes with caution, he sees a girl standing with ice cream. Seeing the fruit ice in her hand, he exhaled with relief. He had already thought about something terrible. Ninal declares that this is a kind of tea party, iced black tea with lemon, but Chris refuses, since he still needs to sort out the questionnaires. He's even glad that the girl was still in the restroom, although the hero thought that she left right after lunch. And since Ninal is here, he decides to ask her for help with his work, but having said his request, he notices that the girl is too keen on the ice cream, which has begun to melt. Sweet liquid flows from her wrist, reaching her elbow, and Ninal already intends to lick it all off. But then she notices the closely embarrassed gaze of the deputy, who froze in a frenzy. This confuses her and she quickly turns away from Chris, asking for forgiveness and trying to explain that almost no one goes to the literary club, so she is used to being here alone. Sitting down at the table, she notices that the young man returned quite early, and wonders if he is going to finish working on the questionnaires. Chris replies that he has no choice. By tomorrow everything must be transferred to the travel agency, so today he will have to work hard. After listening to him, Ninal offers him her help. The young man is very happy with her response, but in response she casually decides to mention that maybe the hero would like to meet someone after school. She was unable to finish her thought, as the lights in the room suddenly went out. While Chris does not understand who he needs to meet, the girl decides to move away from this topic and go look for candles. But after moving a couple of steps away, a light gust of wind covers her head with a curtain, from which she quickly disentangles herself. And out of fear, Ninal begins to scream and cling to the hand of Chris, who also turned out to be very frightened. But realizing that there is no such danger, the guys sharply move away from each other in embarrassment and Ninal asks the young man for forgiveness for scaring him so much. Chris tries to control himself, but there is a clear trembling in his voice. He assures her that everything is fine and it's just a creepy atmosphere pressing on him. But the young man assures Ninal that he is a man and must protect her, so she need not apologize to him. The girl is very flattered by these words, and she offers to have dinner together as a thank you, to which she receives instant consent. Cooking in the moonlight, Ninal explains that she came to pick up food from the refrigerator because the lights were going to be turned off due to renovations. Chris asks if she often cooks here, and this turns out to be true. The girl notes that this is not because there are few people here, but the reason is that her sisters often come to her here and the food in the refrigerator is also from them. The main character also decides to remember her words that he should meet someone tomorrow. Chris assumes that this person ignored the girl's refusal and now he will need to deal with it, and Ninal confirms this by quietly hooting. To her surprise, she wanders off topic and notices the young man pouring juice into his sauce. When asked what it is, Chris solemnly presents her with his secret recipe. The sauce tastes great, but if you use fruit juice, it will be even better. Ninal is interested in this unusual taste combination, and she decides to try this delicacy. Having bitten into a sausage with cheese and sauce, she begins to stretch the cheese as long as possible, and trying to put it into her mouth again, she loses her balance a little and falls on Chris with her back. The girl is delighted, and saying that it is incredibly tasty, invites the young man to try this delicacy too, handing him a piece. Only one thought sounds in Chris's head: Ninal looks so cute now. After this dinner, they seem to have become closer. Today he realized how sweet she was, and also realized that there was something special about her, different from other girls. If he tries to describe its beauty in detail, then a phrase immediately comes to mind that he once heard somewhere, that on Mount Bishon it is rainy and sunny, and in the green forests it is windless and cool. Noticing how Ninal was snoring, he decided to cover her with his jacket so that she would not freeze. After that, Chris sat down to continue checking the profiles, and meanwhile the girl clung harder to the fabric of his jacket. The morning rays caressed the face of the young man, who had fallen asleep on his desk and was quietly snoring. But the sun was not the only irritating factor that woke him up. Opening his eyes, Chris saw Tana's face in front of him, who was already wishing him good morning. She decides to remind him about the documents, and from this frightening reminder, the young man instantly wakes up. He remembers that last night he dealt with the questionnaires together with Ninal, and then the power went out, and he didn't even have time to transfer everything to the computer. The young man rushes to double-check all the documents. He doesn't understand where everything is, what he was working on yesterday, while Tana at this time is only thinking about who he was with last night. She is angry because Chris has already spent the night with Melinda and Ninal, and she still missed her chance. Leaving Tan's office, she instructs the young man to sort out the papers for her today, since she needs to come to her senses. Chris is frightened by her request, and before she left, she decided to give him the ticket that the travel agency gave them for a river cruise. Tana mentions that Molly, Melinda, and Ninal will also be on it. The young man was about to hint at why the president didn't just send Melinda to him to hand him over, but Tana was already on edge and screaming at him not to ask her any questions. Leaving the office, the president thinks that since Ninal is with them, they will see each other all the time, and perhaps with Melinda. After all, they have the same interests. Chris, meanwhile, visits Melinda, and she immediately suggests that he was tired of messing around with the girl and came to her in his free time. Maybe the young man even decided to abandon her. But the reason is that the main character came to find out if she was free on Saturday evening. Since they will be having dinner on a cruise, he thought it would be nice to be in the fresh air. Melinda even choked on her chupa chups in surprise and wants to know if this is normal if he has a girlfriend. But Chris interrupts her and says that his girlfriend is going there too. And he also decides to mention that the student council president will go there. There are only 5 tickets for those who deal with brochures. The invitation was given to them by the editor-in-chief, so he wants to know whether she will go or not. This information was like a bucket of cold water dousing the girl. Hearing all this, Melinda, out of nerves, bit into a lollipop and almost choked on it and began coughing heavily. She stands up determinedly and walks across the tennis table while Chris tries to figure out what's going on. Deftly grabbing the racket and ball, she gave him an ultimatum: if the young man defeats her, then she will answer him. And swinging, she makes the first serve, relying on her masterful skills. But to her surprise, Chris deftly hits the ball, touching her half of the field. It bounces, so Melinda could not hit it. The girl did not even suspect that in front of her was Master Chris Brown from the school table tennis team, the receiver of the god of the rotating ball, the summoner of dark forces, hitting the target directly. Melinda does not despair and decides to resort to cunning, saying that Ninel is behind the young man. She falls, but even this deceptive maneuver of hers did not help. The young man hits the ball right on her forehead. Chris points out that such cheap tricks don't work on a master like him. Melinda is still not ready to give up, so she launches a new series of attacks. But all her persistence turns out to be in vain. The score was devastating, 1-12. Meanwhile, Chris has already managed to go get them some soft drinks. He notices that it turns out Melinda is not so strong, greedily swallowing the drink. The girl asks him not to exaggerate, because it was just a game. Melinda points out that he also asked her if she wanted to go on a cruise with him. The young man giggles and says that she also contributed to the work, and that's why he decided to call her. The girl moves closer to his face and embarrassedly says that this is not what she meant at all. Chris again thinks about what would have happened between them if he had met her earlier. He decides to take a break and starts asking the girl what she would like to do and how she feels. The guys didn't even suspect that they were currently being overheard by a sly fox, who was surprisingly happy with Melinda's agreement to go on the cruise. Sitting in a cafe, Chris feels awkward, because Ninel persuaded him to meet someone, but he forgot the time and arrived earlier. He is nervous because the person who was supposed to come probably did not receive a clear explanation. Feeling that there is some strange atmosphere around, the young man decides to look around and, to his horror, notices a familiar face. It turns out to be Molly. She apparently didn't think that he would recognize her with glasses. The girl looks at him and silently points to the phone. Taking the hint, Chris looked at his phone and saw messages there saying that his sister had decided today to be his secret agent, and then she wrote that she would not allow him to date unfamiliar bad women and would not allow him to get married. While he is trying to pacify his sister, a girl approaches his table and asks if she can sit next to him. She notices that Chris is wearing a serum school uniform and wants to know if he studies there. The young man is distracted from the phone, and the stranger continues to ask him questions like whether he knows Ninel and whether the rumors that she has found a boyfriend are true. She wants to know how she is doing and what kind of relationship she has with Chris. The main character decides to answer, briefly saying that they have a normal relationship, while he is trying with all his appearance to show his disinterest, because if Molly decides that he wants to get to know her, then he is a dead man. Now Chris is wondering how this girl can know Ninel. Making a note in her notebook that this guy is suspicious, the stranger declares that she has known Ninel since childhood. She also adds that this is her main rival. From such information, Chris choked on his tea. She decides to clarify whether Ninel has ever mentioned her, and she turned to Chris as a classmate of the girl, saying his first and last name. The young man wants to understand how she can know him, but then Ninel herself comes to them. Trying to catch her breath, she apologizes and answers Chris's question herself. It turns out that his photograph is now on the school's official website. The young man decides to clarify whether this is the girl she wanted to meet. Ninel apologizes for not warning him and introduces the guest as her sister Sierra Bravo from the capital's drama academy. Sierra says that love among young schoolchildren is beautiful. Noticing that a boy and a girl call each other classmate and sister, she recommends that they come up with other nicknames for each other. At the same moment, Chris hears the nickname Darling flash across the couple at the next table. Now he understands Tana and Melinda's displeasure when they hear such things. Ninel takes him by the hand and says that they don't need nicknames yet, and besides, this is the first relationship for him and Chris. Sierra, looking at them, decides to make sure of her guesses that this is all a pretense for the sake of a goal. The already difficult situation is strained by the presence of Chris's younger sister. The young man decides to say that he actually doesn't do that kind of thing and that in general he is an open person. He adds that he and Ninal are going through all this for the first time. Realizing that serious measures need to be taken, Ninal approaches Chris and says that she agrees with him and they need to overcome this difficulty in the relationship. And she also thinks that it wouldn't hurt for them to practice some basic things for couples. Realizing that they would have to train in public, Chris broke out in a cold sweat from excitement. But the public is not so bad, he cannot demonstrate it here, since his sister is watching him. Molly, seeing all this, cannot restrain herself, and leaves the table, looking straight at her target. Sierra, meanwhile, cannot believe that this is all happening for real. Seeing her reaction, Ninal retreats from Chris and asks for forgiveness, and says that she was embarrassed to ignore sister Sierra. The girl, realizing that there is no point in being here anymore, replies that everything is fine, because they are a couple, and she has business and doesn't want to linger any longer. Finally, she wants to know if Ninal told her brother Steve about the two of them. The girl replies that he will tell him this when the opportunity presents itself. When Sierra left the cafe, Ninal became noticeably lighter, and she decides to ask Chris if he noticed that Molly ran away. The girl asks him for forgiveness and says that she is very worried about this. The main character tries not to show that he is in a panic, and tells her that everything will be fine, and he will try to explain everything to her. His sister is still very understanding. Chris decides to switch the topic and find out more about brother Steve. Is this really another reason why they should pretend to be a couple? Ninal tries to say that this is not entirely true and offers to tell a story for greater understanding. The three of them were friends, but everything was quite complicated. They met Steve as children, he was her mentor. They were very nice to Ninal and they often played together. Their connection did not break even after she was transferred to a new school. Sierra always really liked Steve and Ninal, of course, knew about it. And therefore, closer to school graduation, Sierra confessed to the young man, but she did not expect that Steve would reject her because he liked Ninal. She talks about how she didn't want to be part of a love triangle. Only now did Chris finally understand why she asked him to be her fake boyfriend. Today the girl saw Sierra behave as reserved and elegant as always. This indicates that the situation is very bad. The friendship of two people deteriorated because of love. Sierra probably thought that it was all her fault, although she did nothing. The main character understands that Ninal, in the hope of making friends, decided to start this fake relationship. The young man would like to tell her some words of consolation, but he could not think of anything suitable. At the same time, Tana started spying on one of her competitors, and at the moment she did not understand anything. After school, Melinda ran, her heels sparkling, to the lingerie store. The president, hiding, gathering her strength, she just needed an excuse to talk to her. At that moment, the rival was looking through options for underwear, since it was very important for her to prepare for tomorrow. She had already imagined how she would spend the night on a cruise and would probably run into Chris there. And then her stunning lingerie will definitely come in handy. The student's mind did not stop visiting various fantasies. But now she is in despair, because the consultant advises her all sorts of bad taste. There is nothing suitable at all. But if she chooses a sexy style, it might be a little wrong. All this thinking made her head start to explode. Seeing that Melinda is in a desperate situation, Tana finally decides to approach her and offer her help. The president immediately begins to select suitable options and even offers to pay for them. Melinda seems to like this idea. But first she decides to make sure of Tana's tastes, lifting her skirt and looking at what panties she's wearing today. This action makes both girls blush from the shame that literally consumed them. Melinda tries to justify herself and say that she was too carried away and did it unwittingly. She tries to beg for forgiveness and, having said that she did not mean to do this, while saying this, she still held onto the skirt and ended up completely pulling it off the president. Standing in the fitting room, Tana explains that she actually came here because she heard that Melinda would be going on a trip together. The girl confirms this information, and has not yet moved away from the whole situation, and says that if Tana is worried about this and does not want her to go, then Melinda can refuse. Turning towards the president, she almost saw the girl take off her bra. Melinda turns away and asks why Tana is taking off her clothes. The president considers this a strange reaction, because a couple of minutes ago they were picking out her underwear and, in general, why did they go to the locker room then? Tana approaches her and declares that even though their relationship is quite complicated, now their common enemy is Ninal. The girl agrees with this. The president continues to develop his plan and suggests that tomorrow evening they should unite and eliminate the biggest problem. Melinda understands that her comrade in arms means to go together against Ninal. Now came the moment that Chris feared most, this explanation in front of his sister. But this time it's difficult for him to get out, because yesterday he left the house and even kissed. Now she wants to establish very strict control over him. The young man has already tried to explain to her that it was not a kiss and this time he will just be with friends, but his little sister refuses. As soon as she heard that he would stay with the bad girls for the whole night, her imagination immediately painted colorful and terrifying pictures for her, and she could not allow this. Chris asks her not to exaggerate. The cruise will only have food and the night sky. The brother has already realized that his sister's imagination makes her see the worst picture, but he had no idea that his little sister had an emergency plan. To do this, you just need to stick a tattoo on your brother's stomach. No matter how strong the temptation, he will not be able to take off his clothes. While Chris was trying to fight the little beast, their mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and heard all this chaos. Ultimately, due to his sister's attack, he was late for the ship. But at the same time, ladies were already waiting for him on the pier. He was the first to notice Ninel in a traditional red outfit. The second thing that caught his eye was Melinda standing in a cute yellow dress and staring admiringly at the young man. And last but not least, he saw Tanu, who captivated him with her deep black dress, like the starry sky. They stood in front of him, waiting for him to invite someone to come with him first, and this made Chris nervous. But Ninel saves him. She is the first to take his hand and invite him to go together. Tana and Melinda visibly tensed. Their rival managed to get ahead of them again. But the president decides to reassure his comrade in arms and say that she should take him away for now. The Mandarin had also already arrived at the pier, and noticed that Tana and Melinda were communicating suspiciously closely. While sitting at dinner, Chris calls the waiter to say that there has been some mistake. He wants to know why they only serve celery, but the worker tells him that it's on the menu, so it's okay. Tana apologizes to Ninel and says that today the dishes are too simple to take care of Chris. Seeing the question in the eyes of her rival, she explains that the young man loves celery very much. His sister always buys it at the market. Chris, meanwhile, found himself hostage with Melinda, and, hearing this conversation between the girls, he does not understand when he liked celery. He tries to find out what's wrong, but Melinda orders him to lie still and not even try to squeak. Tana continues the performance and pretends that she is very embarrassed, because she forgot that Ninel is actually Chris's girlfriend. And in general, she should probably already know all her boyfriend's food preferences. The main character already realized that this was a trap, and the two teamed up against Ninel. Things are bad, now only he can save his fake girlfriend. Chris slowly reached forward and grabbed the unsuspecting Mandarin's sleeve. He understands that if Ninel wants to prove the veracity of their relationship and says that he knows about it, he will definitely fall into a trap when it turns out that he actually hates celery. It will all be too suspicious. Ninel looks at the girls in surprise and says that Chris never told her about this. Hearing this answer, the rivals drooped. This was not the reaction they expected. The girl promises that when it gets cooler, she will bring lunch to school and will definitely cook him something with celery. Only when Ninel looks up does she finally notice that her boyfriend is now lying on Melinda's lap, barely showing signs of life. The Mandarin decides to join the conversation and ask if they are being too unfair to the deputy. He doesn't like celery, and she wants to know if it seems too cruel for them to feed him this. This information strikes Ninel like lightning. She looks at Tanu and notices that the president started this whole tirade about a vegetable. There was deathly silence at the table as the president collected her thoughts. Melinda continues to act out this performance and tries to force the celery into the deputy's mouth. Tana decides to change the topic of conversation and laughingly says that it seems her mother asked to say hello to her uncle and aunt and ask how they are doing. Ninel doesn't understand what's going on, but she sends greetings from her family to her family. The girl already suspects that they want to break ties with them. Chris wonders if their families know each other, and as it turned out that this is true, Tana mentions that Ninel seems to have been raised in strictness. During this conversation, the president takes off his shoes from his feet and gives a signal to Melinda under the table. Tana continues to ask about Ninel's relatives. She wants to know if they are worried about her fate. Melinda finally decides to keep up and also ask the question if her family knows about her relationship with Chris. Tana supports her and adds that Ninel's family, unlike her family, knows better. She wonders what they would think about the rumors about the relationship. The Mandarin, sitting at this table, increasingly did not understand what was happening to all of them. And looking under the table, everything became even more confusing for her. She wondered when Tana and Melinda managed to unite and why the president was helping this pink-haired one. Ninel answers all these questions, explaining that her family is more traditional, and she has not yet told her parents about this relationship. The rivals begin to assent to each other and say that if they were her, they would immediately tell their parents about everything. But to everyone's surprise, Ninel takes Chris by the hand and declares that her parents still think that she should find a boyfriend, so she now intends to introduce them to the deputy. Main character immediately agrees to this proposal. Tana and Melinda begin to seethe with anger again. The young man is pleased that his fake girlfriend is protecting him, and Ninel herself at the moment feels superior to the situation. To add fuel to the fire, she invites everyone to go to bed, and her rivals immediately imagine how these lovebirds spend the night together. Melinda tries to stop the young man, because they were going to have dinner, and why should they go to bed at all? Ninal helps him free Chris from her clutches, and hurries to inform him that the ticket includes one triple room and one room for a couple. And since they are a couple, it will be more convenient for them to stay in a double room. They are in a relationship. Watching the young people leave, Tana decides to ask her rival whether she really wants to take him away. The tangerine unexpectedly flies up to the president and, shutting her mouth, replies that everything is fine. The president apparently wanted to say that it would be a shame if they went to bed so early, and if no one objects, they could still play games in the living room. Ninal stared intently at Tanya and began to slowly assess the situation. The tangerine begins to threaten the president, to reveal all her plans. In the end, the girl admits that she really could have rushed. Melinda sees what seems to be behind her. Her former ally begins to whisper. Turning around, the bosom friends walk away. The girl realizes that she has already said that they cannot be at the same time. Lying in the living room of the suite, Chris had no idea what was waiting for him. And out of nowhere, Melinda appeared on his bed, and from such a turn he even jumped up from the sofa. He immediately panics and tries to find out why the girl is here. But Melinda is now more interested in why he is lying here. Instead of talking with his girlfriend in bed, the young man replies that Ninal is now changing clothes and wants to read a book, so he is not going to disturb her. He wishes his classmate good night, but thoughts keep swarming in his head. Although he promised Ninal that they would sleep in the same room, this is a fake relationship, so he thought it was better for him to be in the living room. But now he has another problem to worry about. Melinda climbed under the blankets with him and says that her neighbor is also changing her clothes now. She has nowhere to go now, so she persuades him not to object and to move. Meanwhile, Tana was sitting in Ninal and Chris's room, and was in touch with the Mandarin. She doubts that what they are planning will be a good idea. But the assistant advises her to find an excuse to play with the deputy in their room, and when Ninal comes, invite her too, otherwise she doesn't want these two to sleep together. The plan may have been a good one, but Tanu is worried that that idiot Chris hasn't returned yet. Ninal, entering the room, heard some sounds and decides to ask if the deputy is still sleeping. She goes into the room, as if not realizing that the president is in the room, not the deputy, and calmly sits down on the bed. Turning around, the girl in a calm voice invites them to lie down just like that. Tana realizes that everything is starting to go wrong, and she plans to pretend that she needs to go to the toilet and slowly get out of here. If Ninal finds out that it is she, then she will have problems, but it was already too late. She pulled the president by the hand onto the bed and said that she was not going to let him go anywhere. The girl smiles and declares that they can sleep together. Lying on the bed, Tana identifies two dangerous factors, the dim light of the lamp and Ninal's glasses, all of which can give her away. The president is thinking about what is best for her to do, and for now he is trying not to make sounds and even hold his breath. Having changed clothes, Ninal went back to bed and decided to find out if Chris still wanted to sleep. The president covers himself tightly with the blanket, turns to his side and hooters in response. Trying to copy the deputy's voice, she says that she is already falling asleep. She just needs to wait until the girl falls asleep and then she can escape from here. But Ninal doesn't let up, and now she wants to know if Chris noticed anything strange in Tanya. She continues and says that she feels like the president is hostile towards her. Tana, lying next to her, does not understand why she is talking about this. She suggests that perhaps the president was getting close to Melinda to get her out of the way, to which a whoop is also heard in response. Miss Sinclair understands that it seems that they were beginning to suspect her, and for all this she begins to blame Melinda, making her the cause of all the problems. Ninal realizes that she has had to defend herself lately, and Melinda suspects her. She understands that this needs to end as soon as possible. The girls already teamed up last time and caused problems, and therefore they definitely need to be defeated. Putting her hand on supposedly Chris, Ninal asks if he remembers what happened at the literary club. Tana begins to panic, as she does not understand what is being said. Now everything is serious. The threat hangs directly over the president and repeating what happened at the club. Only when Ninal sat on top did she realize that something was clearly wrong here. There was only one question in Tana's head at that moment: did these two do something obscene in the club? She doesn't hold back, and, by asking a question in her voice, she gives herself away. This terribly strange situation is disrupted by a scream outside the door, which made Tana and Ninal distracted. A few minutes ago, it was also not easy for Chris. Melinda wanted to break through his defenses in every possible way, but the girl did not know that he had absolute protection. Then the girl decides to hug the young man and say that he can then resist to the last. Chris is trying to shake off this insidious girl, and she starts talking about how she already sees that his girlfriend is coming here and he is trying to explain all this to her. They both end up on the floor and the deputy decides to find out what she's doing. Melinda notices that there is some mark on his stomach and wants to know what it means. She immediately assumes that this is a sign of some kind of cult. Chris didn't even think that everything would turn out this way. The door to the living room opens and Ninel and Tana come inside. A strange scene opens before their eyes. Melinda sits on top of the half-naked Chris and, lifting his t-shirt, examines something. When everyone sat down at the table, the girl tries to justify herself and say that this is all just a misunderstanding. Tana laughs nervously and thinks that since this is a misunderstanding, she thinks they should go back to the room and rest. Ninel agrees, but in a sad voice says that it just seems to her that Chris doesn't want to sleep. The president invites Melinda to go to bed, but she says that she still needs to finish something, and Chris asks to go to bed first. Adjusting her glasses, Ninel suggests that she apparently is not destined to rest at night, and since no one wants to waste time sleeping, she offers to play some games for them. Tana decides to take the initiative and reveals that she found the cards in the deputy's room. Chris already understands that these are most likely not ordinary cards. Genuine interest can be read in the girl's eyes. Everyone is a little on edge and Ninel simply invites everyone to finally play them. She reveals that Chris's friends are her friends too, and why don't they take advantage of the moment and get closer. Tanu is very worried about this. After all today's incidents, she clearly doubts her. Melinda supports the initiative and also agrees to join the game. The president understands that she will still have to do this and joins the guys. To find out who will be first, they decide to play rock paper scissors, and in the end Melinda wins. She immediately chooses Chris as her partner, although he shouts at her to change her mind. She calls him a coward and then decides to choose an action card. Having pulled out a card from the deck, she first shows it to all the participants. Seeing the excited faces, she wonders what the task is and is asked to take a look for herself. As it turned out, she needed to eat a chocolate stick together with a person. This task pleases Chris, because even though Melinda likes to attack first, she has a weakness. She will never dare to do such a thing in public. The girl brings her face closer to Chris and, closing her eyes, prepares to take a bite. Saying that he himself is to blame for everything, she bites off the stick. This makes the young man nervous, and he begins to lose his balance and fall on his task partner. Tana wanted to grab him by the collar, but didn't have time, and Chris ended up lying on top of Melinda. From under it comes the thin feminine voice of a girl who says that it is quite heavy. Chris understands this and begins to fidget on her trying to get up. Tanya and Ninel, who are watching all this, obviously don't like this. As a result, the situation becomes even worse when he, unable to get up, falls on Melinda's chest. At this time, the president moves closer to him and asks him through clenched teeth when they will stop making out. Ninel is also not happy. A kind of depressing standstill appeared in the room. Melinda decides, for everyone's safety, to simply throw the young man off her, and she decides to suggest that it is better for them to always choose truth over action. The heroine turns to Chris and asks if he has any secrets. Melinda is wondering if he believes in fate. The already noticed young man is trying to give a negative answer to this, but the question continues. She wants to know what is the likelihood that someone will appear here. Chris begins to shout at her that she visited the men's room without permission. Suddenly, they begin to hear stomping and someone's voices approaching them. Out of fear, Melinda throws the mop and locks herself with the young man in the booth. It turned out to be just students who were discussing what they would eat in the cafeteria today. The girl leaned her ear to better hear what the guys were talking about, and meanwhile Chris was blushing more and more every minute. Due to the fact that the booth was designed for only one person, the guys had to make room and Melinda literally ended up on the deputy's lap. Chris realizes that it is becoming increasingly difficult for him to restrain himself, and as luck would have it, the students still do not leave the toilet. Vices begin to take over the young man and now he is already half a centimeter away from grabbing Melinda's ass. The girl notices this and suddenly sits down on the floor next to him. She is embarrassed and says that although they have a close relationship, she is embarrassed to do such a thing here. Chris wants her to rid her head of such thoughts. This is the men's room, and he still doesn't understand what she left here. Hearing that the schoolchildren have finally left the premises, Melinda wants to know if he admits that he has feelings for her. The young man replies that he did not say so. For the girl, this is the same as a confession, so she takes him by the tie and orders him to say that he likes her, otherwise she will not get out of here. Chris asks to let him go, but Melinda is persistent and demands that he say so. Ninel interrupts them with a desire to find out what kind of secrets they have. Tana suggests that Melinda most likely meant thoughts of all sorts of obscenities. Ninel immediately begins to feel embarrassed and says that she doesn't know if she can say this out loud. Then Chris decides to step in and admit that he is subject to his sister's control. Melinda slaps him so that he doesn't say what everyone already knows about him. The girl decides to give him one last opportunity to improve. She wants to know how this will end, and seeing the twinkle in the young man's eyes, she decides to find out if he is sure that he can tell it. Tana no longer understands who is talking about what, but she understands that Chris is now admitting something frank. Covering his face with his hand out of embarrassment, the deputy admits that he likes combat suits. He also adds that such costumes are often worn by girls, and with these words his imagination really ran wild. This image can be simpler, for example, the combat clothing of a mechanic girl. Or it could be a consciousness-changing sorceress in an unusual dress and with a staff. After all, this could be the costume of a cold-blooded, sexy killer. Melinda stops him, saying that this is already making her feel awkward. Chris is indignant and says that she shouldn't have asked about it then. Ninel becomes the next player, and she also decides to choose the truth. And he asks Tanya a question, wondering if she has a close relationship with Chris and how she feels about him. The deputy immediately wondered why the girl suddenly asked about this, although he understands that bullying him is already an integral part of their life. Smiling, Tana says that, of course, they have a close relationship with the deputy. The guys don't understand what this is all about. They are starting to tempt the president, and a tense atmosphere has appeared in the room again. Tana runs her finger along Chris's chin and notes that, after all, they've worked together for so long. She puts the young man on her lap and says that she is afraid that her classmates will not be able to understand her feelings for Chris. After all, throughout their entire communication she treated him like a younger brother. Tana asks the deputy to confirm the veracity of her words, but the young man believes that this cannot be. Is that really how she treated him? Melinda begins to boil with anger hearing such a blatant lie from the president. The girl laughs and asks if he would like anything else, but Chris immediately shouts out that he has absolutely no ideas. Ninel decides to join this fight and, approaching the guys, carefully takes Chris's head. She thanks Tana for her care and, placing the young man on her lap, declares that from now on it is her responsibility to take care of Chris. This clearly does not sit well with the president, and she believes that now it is her turn to choose action. The fox draws a card and asks the sweet couple to complete a task, which says that you need to kiss the lower abdomen 10 times. Tana planned this trick knowing that he would not be able to lift his t-shirt and show the sticker. Realizing the deplorability of the situation, Ninel decides to take everything into her own hands. She resolutely sat on top of Chris and began to lift her t-shirt while the young man was simply burning with awkwardness. The girl asks him to quickly do this task. She begins to feel shame and excitement. Melinda, Tana, and Chris simply did not understand what would happen here now. The young man wants to know whether he really needs to do this, to which he receives a positive answer. Ninel is afraid that if they don't do this, their rivals will begin to doubt that they are really a couple. Chris yells for the girl to stop and lightly pushes her away from him. The flushed young man asks to be allowed to prepare for this. Ninel understands that it will be useless to wait and she decisively lifts Chris's t-shirt. Chris tries to cover himself, realizing that a little more in something on his stomach will be visible. At this moment, everyone sees this sticker, which is like a brand from his little sister. The girls start laughing and teasing him about his sister's control. Meanwhile, Ninel decides not to hesitate and, lowering her head, she slowly kisses his lower abdomen. The girl feels how Chris began to tremble and she decided to find out what was happening to him. It turns out that the young man feels and is afraid of tickling. Ninel gets up and confirms his loss, saying that they can now move on to the next one. Now it's Chris's turn. Taking the deck in his hands, the young man only thinks that he cannot continue in this spirit. The fox sarcastically notes that it seems that everything in their relationship is not as smooth as she thought. She also wonders if lovers like them really have problems. Ninel, hearing this, takes the deck from the deputy and says that she needs to prove something to Tanya. The president insists that if young people cannot do this, then she will not force them, but the opponent is already serious about taking revenge. Tana gets another task, which says that you need to leave a mark on the neck of a player of the opposite sex. Melinda is clearly not happy with this task. She believes that the president is only giving them a chance. But she calms the girl down, knowing that Ninel has the right to choose, and meanwhile the heroine has already rushed to Chris. And seeing with what determination the girl rushed to complete the task, she understands that apparently she really gave them a chance for something more. Ninel was already a millimeter from his neck when Chris began to ask him not to do this here. She doesn't listen to him and, wrapping her arms around the young man's body, puts a hickey on his neck. While Chris was unconscious from such a blood-stirring situation, Ninel had already invited the president to continue, and she agreed without hesitation. Before the deputy had time to move away from the previous task, the next one sounded, in which he had to do 10 push-ups over the player. Tana immediately rushed to complete the task, but it turned out to be not an easy one. Watching this, Melinda begins to sulk and say that this is not fair, and she also wants to participate, but Ninel replies that she cannot meddle. This is only between her and Tana. The duel continues and now the task required raising a player of the opposite sex, and Ninel courageously lifted Chris in her arms. The intensity dropped a little when Tanya was given the task of listening to the heartbeat. But adrenaline began to boil in her blood again on the next task, when Ninal had to feed a player of the opposite sex without using her hands. A similar fate awaited Tana immediately after, because now she had to get a player of the opposite sex drunk without using her hands. Next, Ninal had to exert all her natural charm to show cuteness. With each round the situation became tense, the girls mercilessly attacked each other, and the invincible Chris Brown was defeated with defeat. He fell on the table exhausted and asked to give up. In the end, he runs away from them, saying that he urgently needs to go to the toilet. Melinda asks him to wait, since she too cannot bear it anymore. Left alone, Ninal asks if her rival wants to continue, but Ninal falls to the floor from fatigue and says that this is a game only for couples, and if her opponent still wants to play with her, then she will have to doubt her preferences. After such words, the rival begins to carefully touch the president's chest. If the game has come to an end, then Ninal now wants to hear an honest answer from Tana about whether she likes Chris. The president freezes in a frenzy. She could not expect such pressure from the quiet head of the literary club, and since they are now alone, Tana decides to confess that she likes him. To be honest, faced with such a direct question, she couldn't even think of an answer. Her memory stores memories that no one knows about. Of course, all this didn't happen like that. She just had to be brave. It might all be stupid, but of course she just had to say it. But she limply followed the hunter, was weak and failed. Desperately clinging to the hope of getting an answer, he only continues to strategically advance and retreat. Having expressed all this, Tana changes her answer and says that she doesn't like anyone, life is boring for her, and she just knows the deputy for a long time, and he is a very interesting person. After listening to her rival's explanations, Ninal breathed a sigh of relief. As she left, she noted that this was all good because, after all, Chris now had a girlfriend. Finally, the war between Ninal and the president ended and everything returned to calm, and the young man was able to sleep after such commotion and noise. Suddenly, in the darkness, something touched the protagonist's cheek, and this made him reflexively begin to fight the darkness. Without opening his eyes, he waves his fists and says that any evil will be punished. But realizing that the threat has disappeared somewhere, he lies back down. Ninal is touched by his foolishness. Only now the girls noticed that they both came to Chris, at first not noticing each other in the darkness. But none of them could have expected what would happen next. Melinda's head poked out from under Chris's blanket. She yawns and demands that no one touch the blanket, but when she sees her rivals in front of her, she tries to immediately hide under the blanket, saying that they have mistaken themselves. Her rivals throw off the blanket with her and want to know how she ended up here. Ninal, in a calm tone, suggests finding out why she is here. Melinda, smiling, says that she was here only on work matters, correcting mistakes, that's all. The girl also wants to know why Tana came here, but the president immediately assures that she didn't do anything. One mandarin decided to take all 3 places in the room, and was also tossing back and forth, so she had to leave. Tana decides to sleep on the couch and wonders why Chris didn't join Ninal. Shouldn't they be in the couple's room? This question makes the heroine nervous. She mumbles and answers that they just decided that. Listening to all this, Melinda climbs back under the blanket and asks these grumpy girls to turn on the light. Ninal cannot tolerate such impudence, and lies down with Melinda, asking what she is going to do. And in the end, the girl decides not to wait for an answer, but simply move closer to Chris, leaving her rival on the edge. After 2 hours of lying on the sofa and listening to the snoring of all 3, Tana still could not sleep. As a result, she gets out of bed, and quietly approaches Chris, gently kissing him on the cheek.